The death world of Fenris forges its children in the crucible of perpetual winter and endless warfare. Among the countless tribes that struggle for survival across its frozen continents, few produce warriors worthy of the Space Wolves chapter's attention. Logan Grimnar emerged from this harsh environment as a young tribesman whose prowess in battle and natural leadership qualities marked him as exceptional even among Fenris's warrior culture. The exact circumstances of Grimnar's selection remain shrouded in the mists of Fenrisian legend, as is common with many of the chapter's greatest heroes. What records exist suggest he was chosen during one of the traditional trials, where aspiring neophytes must prove their worth against both the elements and their fellow candidates. These brutal tests, conducted in the depths of Fenris's most treacherous wilderness, claim the lives of the vast majority who attempt them. Only those who display not merely physical strength, but the savage cunning and indomitable will that characterizes the Sons of Rus survive to join the chapter's ranks. The transformation from tribal warrior to space marine proved no less challenging for the young Grimnar than it had for countless others before him. The gene seed of Leman Russ, while granting superhuman abilities, also carries unique risks and complications. The Canis helix, the genetic marker that sets the Space Wolves apart from their brother chapters, threatened to overwhelm his human psyche with bestial instincts. Many aspirants succumbed to the curse of the Wolfen during this process, their minds lost to savage madness. Grimnar's mental fortitude proved sufficient to master these primal urges while retaining their beneficial aspects, allowing him to complete his transformation into a full battle brother. As a newly initiated Bloodclaw, Grimnar joined the ranks of the chapter's youngest and most aggressive warriors. These hot-blooded space marines serve as assault troops, their natural ferocity channeled into devastating close-quarters combat. The Bloodclaws operate in packs, learning to fight as a cohesive unit, while their Wolfguard pack leaders attempt to temper their reckless enthusiasm with tactical wisdom. Grimnar's pack participated in numerous conflicts across the Fenris system and beyond, facing everything from orc raiders to chaos cultists in the dark corners of Imperial space. During his time as a Bloodclaw, Grimnar's exceptional abilities began to manifest more clearly. While his pack brothers often charged headlong into battle with little regard for strategy, he displayed an intuitive understanding of battlefield dynamics that allowed him to anticipate enemy movements and exploit tactical opportunities. His fellow Bloodclaws naturally looked to him for guidance during combat, recognizing his superior judgment even when their own battle lust threatened to overwhelm their reason. This emerging leadership quality did not go unnoticed by the chapter's veteran warriors, who began to take special interest in his development. The transition from Bloodclaw to Grey Hunter marked a significant milestone in Grimnar's career. Grey Hunters represent the backbone of the Space Wolves chapter, experienced warriors who have learned to balance their aggressive nature with tactical discipline. They serve as the chapter's primary battle line troops, capable of adapting to any combat situation while maintaining the ferocious fighting spirit that defines the Sons of Rus. Grimnar's elevation to this rank came after he demonstrated exceptional courage and tactical acumen during a particularly brutal campaign against Chaos forces in the Segmentum Solar. As a Grey Hunter, Grimnar's responsibilities expanded beyond simple combat operations. He began to take a more active role in training younger Bloodclaws, sharing the hard-won wisdom he had gained through years of warfare. His natural charisma and proven combat record made him an effective mentor, capable of earning the respect of hot-headed young warriors who might otherwise ignore the counsel of their elders. The pack he led during this period became known for their effectiveness in combat and their unusually low casualty rates, a testament to his growing tactical expertise. The Grey Hunter years also saw Grimnar participate in some of the chapter's most significant campaigns. He fought alongside veteran warriors whose names had become legend throughout the chapter, learning from their example while contributing his own unique insights to their strategic planning. His performance during these conflicts consistently exceeded expectations, whether leading boarding actions against enemy vessels or coordinating ground assaults on fortified positions. The combination of personal prowess and tactical brilliance that would later define his leadership style began to crystallize during this crucial period of his development. Recognition of Grimnar's exceptional qualities eventually led to his selection for the Wolf Guard, the chapter's elite veteran warriors who serve as bodyguards, advisors, and specialized assault troops for the Great Company's leadership. This promotion represented not merely an acknowledgement of his combat abilities, but also recognition of his potential for higher command. Wolf Guard members often go on to become pack leaders, wolf lords, or even great wolves, making their selection one of the most significant decisions in a Space Marine's career. The Wolf Guard role exposed Grimnar to the highest levels of chapter operations, allowing him to observe and learn from the Great Wolf and his senior commanders. He participated in strategic planning sessions, diplomatic negotiations with other Imperial forces, and the complex political maneuvering required to maintain the chapter's independence within the broader Imperial military structure. These experiences proved invaluable in developing the comprehensive understanding of warfare and leadership that would serve him well in later years. During his tenure as Wolf Guard, Grimnar's reputation began to spread beyond the confines of his own chapter. Imperial commanders who had fought alongside Space Wolves' forces began to specifically request his participation in critical operations, recognizing his ability to achieve objectives that had stymied other units. His tactical innovations, particularly his integration of traditional Fenrisian warfare techniques with standard Astartes doctrine, produced remarkable results across a variety of combat environments. The death of the previous Great Wolf created an unprecedented situation within the chapter's leadership structure. The selection of a new Supreme Commander required careful consideration of multiple factors, including combat record, leadership ability, political acumen, and the mystical qualities that the Space Wolves believe mark a true heir to Leman Russ's legacy. The chapter's Wolf Lords, Iron Priests, and Rune Priests engaged in extensive deliberations, consulting both practical considerations and the prophetic visions that guide many of their most important decisions. Grimnar's ascension to the position of Great Wolf represented a departure from traditional patterns of succession within the chapter. Many observers had expected one of the existing Wolf Lords to assume the role, given their experience commanding entire great companies. However, the unique circumstances facing the chapter at that time demanded a leader with exceptional qualities that transcended conventional qualifications. Grimnar's combination of tactical brilliance, inspirational leadership, and deep understanding of both Fenrisian culture and Imperial politics made him the optimal choice despite his relatively young age by Space Marine standards. The transition to Supreme Command brought with it responsibilities that extended far beyond military leadership. As Great Wolf, Grimnar became the ultimate authority over all 12 great companies of the Space Wolves, each led by a Wolf Lord with his own distinct personality, tactical preferences, and areas of expertise. Coordinating these disparate forces while maintaining the chapter's traditional independence required diplomatic skills that few Space Marines possess. Grimnar's ability to earn the respect and loyalty of his subordinate commanders proved crucial in maintaining unit cohesion during this transitional period. His elevation also established him as the primary representative of the Space Wolves in their dealings with other Imperial institutions. The chapter's sometimes fractious relationship with the Administratum, the Ecclesiarchy, and even other Space Marine chapters required careful management to avoid conflicts that could undermine their operational effectiveness. Grimnar's pragmatic approach to these relationships, combined with his unwillingness to compromise on matters of principle, helped establish a new equilibrium that preserved the chapter's autonomy while maintaining necessary cooperation with Imperial authorities. The Great Wolf's connection to Fenris itself represents one of the most significant aspects of his role within both the chapter and the broader Imperial hierarchy. The Death World's population views the Space Wolves not merely as protectors, but as demigod-like figures whose approval and guidance shape the very fabric of Fenrisian society. Grimnar's elevation to Supreme Command automatically established him as the spiritual leader of billions of tribal warriors, whose entire cultural identity revolves around emulating the legendary heroes of the chapter. This relationship extends beyond simple military protection to encompass the preservation of Fenrisian culture and traditions that have remained largely unchanged for millennia. The planet's tribal societies maintain their ancient customs, warrior codes, and religious practices under the benevolent oversight of the Space Wolves, who ensure that these traditions continue to produce suitable recruits for the chapter while protecting them from outside interference. Grimnar's role in this cultural preservation requires him to balance respect for traditional ways with the practical necessities of defending an entire star system. The Great Wolf's influence on Fenrisian society manifests in numerous ways, from the settlement of intertribal disputes to the organization of great hunts that maintain the population's warrior ethos. His decisions regarding resource allocation, territorial boundaries, and military recruitment affect millions of lives across the planet's scattered settlements. The weight of this responsibility, combined with his duties as a Space Marine commander, creates a unique burden that few individuals in the Imperium must bear. Grimnar's legendary status among the Fenrisian population stems not only from his position, but also from his personal qualities and achievements. Stories of his exploits spread throughout the tribal communities, often growing in the telling until they achieve mythic proportions. These tales serve multiple purposes within Fenrisian culture, providing both entertainment and moral instruction, while reinforcing the connection between the common population and their Space Marine protectors. The Great Wolf's awareness of this dynamic influences his public actions, as he recognizes the importance of maintaining the inspirational image that motivates countless young warriors to attempt the trials of selection. The first major test of Logan Grimnar's leadership as Great Wolf came during the opening stages of the First War for Armageddon in the year 444 of the 41st millennium, when the demon Primarch Angron and his World Eaters warband erupted from the warp to devastate the crucial Hive world. The conflict represented more than a simple military engagement. It marked the beginning of Grimnar's complex relationship with imperial politics and his first direct confrontation with the darker realities of the Imperium's governance structure. When the initial astropathic distress calls reached Fenris, the magnitude of the threat became immediately apparent. Angron, the Red Angel and fallen Primarch of the World Eaters Legion, had been elevated to demonhood during the Horus Heresy and now commanded legions of Khorne berserkers alongside hordes of lesser demons. The industrial world of Armageddon, with its massive hive cities and strategic importance to the Imperium's war machine, faced complete annihilation under the assault of one of Chaos's most devastating champions. Grimnar's response demonstrated the tactical acumen that would define his subsequent military career. Rather than committing the entire Space Wolves chapter to a single massive assault, he deployed selected great companies in a series of coordinated strikes designed to disrupt the World Eaters' advance, while Imperial Guard reinforcements mobilized across the planet's surface. The Space Wolves' forces under his command operated with characteristic aggression, launching lightning raids against enemy positions before withdrawing to strike elsewhere, denying Angron's forces the opportunity to engage in the prolonged melee combat they preferred. The Demon Primarch's presence on Armageddon created tactical challenges that conventional military doctrine could not address. Angron's supernatural abilities allowed him to inspire berserker fury in his followers, while his own combat prowess could devastate entire companies of Imperial troops in minutes. The World Eaters warband accompanying him had spent millennia in the Eye of Terror, their bodies and minds twisted by chaos into instruments of pure destruction. These veterans of the Long War possessed experience and equipment that surpassed most Imperial forces, making direct confrontation extremely costly. Grimnar's strategic approach focused on containing the demon incursion, while avoiding the kind of massive frontal assaults that would play to the World Eater's strengths. He coordinated closely with other Imperial commanders present on Armageddon, including elements of the Grey Knights chapter, whose specialized anti-demon capabilities proved crucial in countering Angron's supernatural influence. The Space Wolves' own resistance to chaos corruption, inherited from their Primarch Leman Russ, allowed them to operate effectively in environments where other Imperial forces might succumb to demonic influence. The conflict's resolution came through the combined efforts of multiple Imperial factions, with the Grey Knights ultimately banishing Angron back to the Warp through a series of psychic rituals and direct combat. However, the cost of victory proved enormous, with entire hive cities reduced to rubble and millions of Imperial citizens dead or missing. The World Eaters' Warband, though deprived of their Primarch's leadership, continued to cause significant damage before finally being eliminated or driven off-world. Grimnar's performance during the First War for Armageddon established his reputation as a commander capable of adapting to unprecedented threats while maintaining the aggressive spirit that defined the Space Wolves. His ability to coordinate with other Imperial forces without compromising his chapter's independence impressed senior Imperial commanders, leading to increased cooperation in subsequent campaigns. The lessons learned during this conflict would prove invaluable when Armageddon again faced existential threats in the decades that followed. The Second War for Armageddon presented an entirely different set of challenges, as the massive Orc-Wa led by Gaz-Kul Mag Uruk-Thraka descended upon the world with overwhelming numerical superiority. The green tide that swept across Armageddon's surface consisted of millions of orcs supported by crude but effective war machines, creating a conventional military threat that required different tactical approaches than the demon incursion of the previous war. Grimnar's response to the orc invasion demonstrated his evolution as a strategic commander over the intervening centuries. He deployed Space Wolves' forces in a more integrated fashion with Imperial Guard regiments, recognizing that the sheer scale of the orc assault required sustained defensive operations rather than the hit-and-run tactics that had proven effective against Chaos forces. The Great Wolf personally led several crucial engagements, his presence on the battlefield inspiring both Space Wolves and mortal Imperial troops to extraordinary feats of courage. The urban warfare that characterized much of the Second War played to the Space Wolves' strengths in close-quarters combat, but the Orcs' numerical advantage meant that every victory came at significant cost. Grimnar's tactical innovations during this period included the integration of Fenrisian tribal warfare techniques with standard Astartes doctrine, creating new approaches to urban combat that maximized the effectiveness of smaller elite units against massive enemy formations. His pack leaders adapted these methods throughout their respective great companies, creating a more flexible and responsive command structure. The prolonged nature of the conflict allowed Grimnar to demonstrate his abilities as a coalition commander, coordinating not only with Imperial Guard forces, but also with Titan legions, naval assets, and various other Imperial institutions. His reputation for reliability and tactical competence led to his informal recognition as the supreme Imperial commander on Armageddon, despite the presence of other senior officers with technically equivalent or superior ranks. This elevation reflected both his proven abilities and the respect he had earned from Imperial forces during the First War. The Second War's conclusion, while technically an Imperial victory, left Armageddon severely damaged and its population decimated. Gaz-Kul's eventual withdrawal did not represent a decisive defeat, but rather a tactical repositioning that allowed the Orc warlord to preserve his forces for future campaigns. The incomplete nature of this victory would have significant implications for Armageddon's future, as many Imperial commanders recognized that the Orcs would likely return when circumstances favored another assault. The Third War for Armageddon fulfilled these grim predictions as Gaz-Kul returned with an even larger Wa that threatened to overwhelm the world's rebuilt defenses. This final conflict in the Armageddon trilogy saw Grimnar at the height of his powers as both a warrior and commander, leading Imperial forces in what many considered the most crucial battle of the late 41st millennium. The stakes of this engagement extended far beyond Armageddon itself, as the world's industrial capacity remained vital to the Imperium's war effort across multiple sectors. Grimnar's command during the Third War demonstrated the culmination of centuries of military experience and strategic development. He implemented defensive strategies that drew upon lessons learned from both previous conflicts, creating layered defenses that could absorb the initial Orc assault while preserving Imperial forces for decisive counterattacks. The Space Wolves' role in these operations expanded beyond their traditional function as elite assault troops to include strategic planning, intelligence coordination, and the training of Imperial Guard units in advanced combat techniques. The scale of the Third War required unprecedented cooperation between different Imperial institutions, and Grimnar's ability to navigate the complex political relationships involved proved as crucial as his tactical abilities. He worked closely with commissars, tech priests, naval commanders, and representatives from various other organizations, each with their own priorities and operational doctrines. His skill in managing these relationships while maintaining focus on military objectives demonstrated a level of political sophistication that few Space Marine commanders possessed. The conflict's intensity reached levels that surpassed even the previous Armageddon wars, with entire continents becoming battlefields where millions of combatants clashed in struggles that lasted for months. Grimnar's personal involvement in critical engagements became legendary among Imperial forces, as he led from the front while simultaneously coordinating the broader strategic response. His ability to inspire troops through personal example while maintaining overall command effectiveness represented a rare combination of leadership qualities. The Third War's aftermath created the conditions that would define Grimnar's most significant political conflict with Imperial authorities. The Inquisition's response to the war's conclusion, particularly their treatment of Armageddon's surviving civilian population, brought the Great Wolf into direct confrontation with one of the Imperium's most powerful institutions. The Ordo Malleus, concerned about potential chaos contamination among the population, implemented policies that Grimnar viewed as both militarily counterproductive and morally unacceptable. The Inquisition's decision to subject Armageddon's civilian survivors to extensive screening, relocation, and in many cases elimination, created a fundamental conflict between their institutional priorities and Grimnar's understanding of military necessity and moral obligation. The Space Wolves had fought alongside these civilians throughout the war, witnessing their courage and sacrifice in defense of their world. The Great Wolf's refusal to accept the Inquisition's assessment that these proven Imperial citizens represented a security threat marked the beginning of the most serious political crisis of his career. Grimnar's opposition to the Inquisition's policies reflected both practical military considerations and deeply held principles about the relationship between Imperial institutions and the citizens they were sworn to protect. His experience during the 3 Armageddon Wars had demonstrated the crucial importance of civilian cooperation in defending Imperial worlds against existential threats. The Inquisition's approach, which treated the population as potential enemies rather than valuable allies, contradicted everything he had learned about effective planetary defense. The political ramifications of this conflict extended far beyond the immediate disagreement over Armageddon's civilian population. Grimnar's defiance represented a direct challenge to the Inquisition's authority and their traditional role in determining security policies throughout the Imperium. His position as Great Wolf of the Space Wolves provided him with sufficient political and military power to resist inquisitorial pressure, but this resistance came at significant cost to both his chapter and the broader Imperial war effort. The months of shame that followed represented one of the most serious internal conflicts within the Imperium during the late 41st millennium. The confrontation between Space Wolves forces and inquisitorial troops, supported by Grey Knights units, created a situation where loyal Imperial forces engaged in combat against each other, while external threats continued to menace the Imperium's borders. The irony of this situation was not lost on either side, but the fundamental disagreement over principles made compromise extremely difficult. Grimnar's leadership during this crisis demonstrated his willingness to accept personal and institutional consequences in defense of his principles. The Space Wolves' resistance to inquisitorial authority required careful coordination to to avoid escalating the conflict beyond manageable limits while still maintaining their position. The Great Wolf's ability to navigate this delicate balance, preserving his chapter's integrity while avoiding complete break with imperial authority, showcased political skills that complemented his proven military abilities. The broader implications of the Months of Shame extended throughout the Space Marine chapters and other imperial institutions. Grimnar's successful resistance to inquisitorial overreach established important precedents regarding the autonomy of Astartes' forces and their relationship with other imperial organizations. The conflict demonstrated that Space Marine chapters retained sufficient independence to resist policies they viewed as fundamentally wrong, even when those policies came from institutions with significant political authority. The resolution of the crisis required compromises from both sides, with the Inquisition moderating their approach to Armageddon's civilian population, while the Space Wolves accepted certain limitations on their future operations. However, the fundamental questions raised by the conflict regarding the balance of power between different imperial institutions remained unresolved, creating ongoing tensions that would influence imperial politics for decades to come. The immediate aftermath of the Third War for Armageddon created a power vacuum that various imperial institutions rushed to fill. While Logan Grimnar and his Space Wolves had played a crucial role in the planet's defense, the Inquisition moved swiftly to assert their authority over post-war security arrangements. The Ordo Malleus, responsible for combating demonic threats throughout the Imperium, viewed the extended Orc occupation and the chaotic nature of the prolonged conflict as potential vectors for chaos contamination among Armageddon's surviving population. Inquisitor Gesme Cisneros of the Ordo Malleus arrived on Armageddon with extensive authority to implement whatever measures he deemed necessary to prevent potential chaos infiltration. The Inquisition's assessment centered on the belief that prolonged exposure to warfare, particularly the kind of apocalyptic violence that had characterized the Third War, created psychological conditions conducive to chaos corruption. Their analysis suggested that Armageddon's civilian population, having witnessed horrors that would break the minds of lesser mortals, represented a significant security risk that required immediate and decisive action. The Inquisition's proposed solution involved the systematic screening of every surviving civilian on Armageddon, with those deemed potentially compromised subject to mind wiping, relocation to distant worlds, or in extreme cases, execution. The scope of this operation would affect millions of Imperial citizens who had endured 3 separate invasions of their homeworld over the course of 5.5 centuries. These survivors included not only ordinary civilians, but also PDF troopers, industrial workers, and local administrators, whose knowledge and experience would prove invaluable in Armageddon's reconstruction efforts. Grimnar's initial response to these proposals reflected his practical understanding of planetary defense requirements as much as any moral considerations. The Space Wolves had fought alongside Armageddon's defenders throughout all 3 wars, witnessing firsthand their courage, determination, and unwavering loyalty to the Emperor. The civilian population had endured unimaginable hardships while continuing to support Imperial forces, providing intelligence, supplies, and manpower that proved crucial to the ultimate victory. The Great Wolf viewed the Inquisition's assessment as both factually incorrect and strategically counterproductive. The fundamental disagreement between Grimnar and the Inquisition reflected deeper philosophical differences about the nature of imperial governance and the relationship between institutions and citizens. The Ordo Malleus operated under the principle that potential threats must be eliminated regardless of cost, viewing civilian casualties as acceptable losses in the broader struggle against chaos. Grimnar's perspective, shaped by centuries of defending imperial worlds and working with their populations, emphasized the importance of maintaining civilian loyalty and cooperation through demonstrated protection rather than intimidation. The political dynamics surrounding this conflict were complicated by the presence of Grey Knight's forces on Armageddon, who had participated in the final stages of the Third War and remained in system to assist with post-war security operations. The Grey Knight's chapter, as the chamber militant of the Ordo Malleus found themselves caught between their institutional loyalty to the Inquisition and their respect for the Space Wolves' proven combat record and moral position. This tension created additional complications, as both chapters had fought as allies against common enemies, but now faced the possibility of direct confrontation. Supreme Grand Master Jaros of the Grey Knights attempted to mediate between the competing factions, recognizing that open conflict between loyal Imperial forces would serve only the enemies of humanity. However, his chapter's institutional obligations to the Ordo Malleus limited his ability to support Grimnar's position, despite his personal sympathy for the Space Wolves' concerns. The Grey Knights' unique role as demon hunters made them particularly sensitive to inquisitorial authority, creating a situation where compromise became increasingly difficult. Grimnar's decision to openly defy inquisitorial authority represented one of the most significant challenges to the Ordo Malleus in recent Imperial history. The Great Wolf deployed Space Wolves' forces throughout Armageddon's key population centers, establishing a protective cordon around civilian areas that effectively prevented inquisitorial teams from conducting their planned operations. This deployment required careful coordination to avoid appearing as an act of rebellion against Imperial authority, while still maintaining effective opposition to policies he viewed as fundamentally wrong. The Space Wolves' defensive positions around Armageddon's hive cities created a tense standoff that lasted for several weeks, as both sides attempted to find a resolution that would avoid open warfare. Grimnar's forces maintained strict discipline during this period, avoiding any provocative actions while making their determination to protect the civilian population absolutely clear. The Great Wolf's personal reputation and his chapter's legendary status provided significant political cover for this defiance, as few Imperial commanders were willing to directly challenge the heroes of 3 Armageddon wars. The situation escalated dramatically when Inquisitor Cisneros ordered Grey Knight's forces to break through the Space Wolves' defensive lines and proceed with the planned civilian screening operations. This command placed the Grey Knights in an impossible position, forcing them to choose between their loyalty to the Inquisition and their respect for fellow Astartes, who had proven their dedication to the Emperor through centuries of faithful service. Supreme Grand Master Jaros reluctantly agreed to support the inquisitorial operation, though he privately hoped that a show of force would convince Grimnar to withdraw without actual combat. The first direct confrontation occurred when a Grey Knight strike cruiser attempted to land troops near Hive Hellsreach, where Space Wolves' forces had established a particularly strong defensive perimeter. Grimnar's fleet intercepted the Grey Knight's vessel, leading to a tense standoff in Armageddon's orbital space that lasted for several hours. Both fleet commanders attempted to avoid triggering actual combat while maintaining their respective positions, creating a delicate balance that required exceptional restraint from all involved parties. The naval engagement that followed represented one of the most tragic episodes in recent Space Marine history, as 2 of the Imperium's most elite chapters found themselves exchanging fire over fundamental disagreements about Imperial policy. The Space Wolves' fleet, commanded by Grimnar himself aboard his flagship, engaged Grey Knight's vessels in a series of limited actions designed to prevent enemy landings while avoiding catastrophic damage to either force. The Grey Knights responded with similar restraint, attempting to complete their mission while minimizing casualties among fellow Astartes. The fighting in Armageddon's orbital space continued intermittently for several days as both fleets maneuvered for advantage, while their respective commanders sought diplomatic solutions to the crisis. Grimnar's tactical expertise proved crucial in these engagements, as he utilized the Space Wolves' superior knowledge of the local system to outmaneuver Grey Knight's forces despite their technological advantages. The Great Wolf's ability to coordinate fleet actions while simultaneously managing ground-based defensive operations demonstrated the comprehensive command capabilities that had made him one of the Imperium's most respected military leaders. The ground-based confrontations proved even more complex than the naval battles, as Space Wolves and Grey Knights forces found themselves in direct contact around several of Armageddon's major population centers. Both chapters maintained strict rules of engagement designed to prevent unnecessary casualties, but the fundamental nature of their disagreement made compromise extremely difficult. Individual squad leaders on both sides reported the surreal experience of preparing to fight against warriors they had previously considered brothers in arms. The most significant ground engagement occurred near Hive Tartarus, where a full company of Grey Knights attempted to establish a landing zone for inquisitorial forces. Grimnar personally led the Space Wolves' response, deploying multiple packs in a coordinated defense that utilized the urban terrain to maximum advantage. The resulting battle showcased the tactical brilliance of both chapters, while highlighting the tragic waste of resources that internal Imperial conflicts represented. Neither side achieved decisive victory, but the engagement demonstrated that both forces were prepared to accept significant casualties rather than compromise their fundamental positions. The political ramifications of these confrontations extended far beyond Armageddon itself, as news of the conflict spread throughout Imperial command structures. Senior military commanders, administratum officials, and even other Space Marine chapters found themselves forced to choose sides in a dispute that challenged basic assumptions about Imperial governance and institutional authority. The Inquisition's traditional role as the ultimate arbiter of security matters faced its most serious challenge in centuries, while the Space Marine's reputation for absolute loyalty to the Emperor came under scrutiny from those who viewed Grimnar's defiance as potentially treasonous. The resolution of the crisis came through a series of complex negotiations involving representatives from multiple Imperial institutions, including the Administratum, the Ecclesiarchy, and senior commanders from several Space Marine chapters. The final agreement represented a compromise that satisfied neither side completely, but provided a face-saving solution that allowed both the Inquisition and the Space Wolves to claim partial victory. The civilian population of Armageddon would undergo screening procedures, but these would be conducted by Space Wolves personnel under inquisitorial oversight rather than by inquisitorial teams alone. This arrangement allowed the Ordo Malleus to maintain their authority over security matters while acknowledging the Space Wolves' legitimate concerns about the treatment of loyal Imperial citizens. Grimnar accepted the compromise reluctantly, recognizing that continued resistance might lead to even more severe consequences for both his chapter and the people he sought to protect. The screening procedures that followed proved far less invasive than originally planned, with the vast majority of Armageddon's survivors cleared for continued residence on their homeworld. The long-term consequences of the months of shame established important precedents regarding the relationship between different Imperial institutions and the limits of inquisitorial authority. Grimnar's successful resistance demonstrated that Space Marine chapters retained sufficient independence to challenge policies they viewed as fundamentally wrong, even when those policies came from institutions with significant political power. This precedent would influence future conflicts between Astartes forces and other Imperial organizations, creating a more balanced approach to inter-institutional disputes. The uneasy truce that emerged from the crisis left both sides wary of future confrontations while maintaining their fundamental philosophical differences. The Inquisition continued to view the Space Wolves with suspicion, considering their defiance a dangerous precedent that might encourage other chapters to question inquisitorial authority. Grimnar and his forces remained committed to protecting Imperial citizens from what they viewed as excessive and counterproductive security measures, setting the stage for potential future conflicts over similar issues. The weapon that would become synonymous with Logan Grimnar's legend began its existence in the deepest forges of the Fang, carved from the living rock of Fenris itself. The master artificers of the Space Wolves chapter, working in the ancient tradition passed down from the time of Leman Russ, selected a single piece of adamantium that had been blessed by the planet's harsh winds and tempered by its endless winter. This was no ordinary forging process. but a ritual that combined the technological expertise of the Adeptus Astartes with the primal traditions of Fenrisian weaponcraft that predated the Emperor's arrival on the Death World by millennia. The creation of Morkai required months of careful preparation, as the chapter's iron priests consulted both ancient technical manuals and the shamanistic traditions of Fenris's tribal smiths. The adamantium core was heated in forges that burned with promethium flames blessed by the chapter's wolf priests, while traditional Fenrisian chants echoed through the workshops. Each fold of the metal incorporated elements drawn from Fenris itself: ice from the planet's polar regions, volcanic ash from the Ring of Fire, and fragments of meteoric iron that had fallen from the void to strike the world's surface. These components were not mere symbolic additions, but integral parts of the weapon's construction, their molecular structure altered by the forging process to create a blade that embodied the very essence of the Space Wolves' homeworld. The weapon's distinctive two-handed design reflected both practical combat considerations and the cultural traditions of Fenrisian warfare. The extended grip allowed for devastating strikes that could cleave through power armor with ease, while the weapon's balance enabled rapid transitions between offensive and defensive techniques. The blade itself stretched nearly 4 feet from crossguard to tip, its edges honed to a molecular sharpness that could part ceramite as easily as flesh. The weapon's weight, substantial enough to require the superhuman strength of a space marine to wield effectively, created momentum that could drive the blade through even the most heavily armored opponents. The crossguard incorporated traditional Fenrisian wolf motifs, with stylized heads carved from the same blessed adamantium as the blade. These decorative elements served practical purposes as well, providing additional protection for the wielder's hands while offering secondary striking surfaces for close-quarters combat. The pommel featured a larger wolf head design, its hollow interior containing relics from the chapter's most sacred vaults. These included fragments of armor worn by Leman Russ himself, hair from the legendary wolves that once roamed Fenris in great packs, and crystallized drops of water from the Well of Erd, where the Primarch was said to have received visions of the future. The inscription of protective runes upon Morkai's surface required the combined efforts of the chapter's most skilled rune priests, who worked in shifts to ensure the psychic energies remained stable throughout the process. Each symbol was carved with ritual knives blessed by the Emperor himself, their edges guided by psychic force to achieve the precise depth and angle required for maximum effectiveness. The runes of warding created overlapping fields of protection that would shield the weapon's wielder from the corrupting influence of chaos, while simultaneously disrupting the supernatural abilities of demonic opponents. These protective inscriptions glowed with a faint blue light when exposed to psychic energies, providing visual confirmation of their continued effectiveness. The runes of killing, inscribed alongside the protective symbols, served a more aggressive purpose, channeling the wielder's fury into devastating attacks that could bypass even the most sophisticated defensive systems. These ancient Fenrisian symbols, some predating human settlement on the planet, tapped into primal forces that the chapter's rune priests only partially understood. The killing runes enhanced the weapon's already formidable cutting power, allowing it to slice through force fields, disrupt energy shields, and penetrate the supernatural protections employed by Chaos champions and Xenos overlords. The combination of protective and offensive runic inscriptions created a weapon that was as much a tool of psychic warfare as it was a physical implement of destruction. The blessing ceremonies conducted by the chapter's wolf priests transformed Morkai from a masterwork weapon into a sacred relic worthy of the Great Wolf Station. These rituals, performed in the deepest chambers of the Fang, where the howling of Fenris's winds could not penetrate, invoked the spirits of legendary Space Wolves heroes who had fallen in service to the Emperor. Each wolf priest contributed prayers and benedictions drawn from different aspects of the chapter's spiritual tradition, creating a multi-layered blessing that addressed both the weapon's martial purpose and its symbolic significance as a representation of the Great Wolf's authority. The final blessing incorporated elements drawn directly from the Emperor's own teachings, as recorded in the most sacred texts preserved within the chapter's archives. These imperial benedictions, spoken in High Gothic while incense burned in braziers carved from Fenrisian stone, established Morkai's connection to the broader imperial hierarchy while maintaining its distinctly Fenrisian character. The weapon emerged from these ceremonies not merely as a tool of war, but as a symbol of the Space Wolves' unique position within the Adeptus Astartes, embodying both their fierce independence and their unwavering loyalty to the Emperor's vision. Grimnar's first use of Morkai in combat came during a boarding action against a Chaos cruiser that had been raiding Imperial shipping lanes near the Fenris system. The weapon's balance and cutting power proved immediately apparent as the Great Wolf carved through traitor space marines, whose power armor offered no protection against the blessed adamantium blade. The runes of killing flared with psychic energy as Morkai bit deep into corrupted ceramite, while the protective inscriptions deflected bolter rounds and chainsword strikes that would have found their mark against a lesser protected warrior. The engagement lasted less than 30 minutes, but by its conclusion, the enemy vessel's entire command structure lay dead at Grimnar's feet, their bodies bearing the distinctive wounds that would become Morkai's signature across countless battlefields. The weapon's reputation grew substantially during the campaign against Wa Scarfang, where Grimnar led a strike force of space wolves against one of the largest orc invasions the Fenris system had faced in centuries. The orc warboss Scarfang, a massive brute whose cybernetic enhancements had turned him into a living weapon of destruction, challenged the Great Wolf to single combat in the traditional orc manner. The duel that followed became legendary throughout both the Space Wolves chapter and the orc clans that witnessed it, as Morkai's blessed blade met the warboss's power claw in a series of exchanges that shattered the deck plating beneath their feet. The killing runes blazed with psychic fire as the weapon carved through the orc's mechanical augmentations, while the protective inscriptions deflected the crude but powerful attacks of Scarfang's weaponry. The climactic moment of the duel came when Grimnar executed a devastating overhead strike that split the orc warboss from crown to pelvis, the blessed adamantium blade passing through bone, metal, and flesh with equal ease. The Wa's morale collapsed instantly upon witnessing their leader's death, as the surviving orcs fled in terror from a weapon that could so easily dispatch their most powerful champion. The victory established Morkai's reputation among the greenskin species, with orc shamans spreading tales of the ghost axe that could cut through anything and whose wielder could not be harmed by conventional weapons. The confrontation with the demon Prince Gargachaloth during the Pandarax campaign demonstrated Morkai's effectiveness against the supernatural entities that served the ruinous powers. The greater demon of Nurgle, whose bloated form towered over even Grimnar's imposing figure, wielded plague-encrusted weapons that could corrupt any mortal they touched. The protective runes inscribed upon Morkai's surface flared with brilliant light as they repelled the demon's corrupting influence, while the killing runes channeled the Great Wolf's fury into strikes that could wound even a creature of pure warp energy. The battle raged across the ruins of an Imperial shrine city, with each exchange between the combatants sending shockwaves through the surrounding structures. Gargachaloth's eventual banishment came when Morkai's blessed blade found the weak point in the demon's supernatural defenses, the weapon's sanctified edge disrupting the warp energies that maintained the creature's physical form. The killing runes blazed with such intensity that they temporarily blinded nearby space marines, while the demon's death scream shattered windows across 3 city blocks. The victory against such a powerful supernatural entity established Morkai's reputation as one of the Imperium's most effective anti-demon weapons, leading to requests from other Space Marine chapters and Imperial institutions for the Great Wolf's personal involvement in campaigns against Chaos incursions. The weapon's encounter with the Eldar Autarch Aletharos during the Korava system conflict showcased its effectiveness against Xeno's technology and psychic abilities. The Eldar commander, wielding weapons that incorporated wraithbone and psychically active crystals, initially seemed to possess advantages in both speed and supernatural protection that might have overwhelmed a lesser opponent. However, Morkai's runes of warding disrupted the Autarch's psychic enhancements, while the weapon's blessed construction proved immune to the molecular disruption fields generated by Eldar power weapons. The duel between the two commanders took place atop a burning Imperial cathedral, with each combatant utilizing the three-dimensional battlefield to maximum advantage. The decisive moment came when Grimnar's superior physical strength allowed him to power through the Autarch's defensive techniques, Morkai's massive blade overwhelming the more elegant but lighter Eldar weapons. The killing runes carved through the Xenos warrior's armor as if it were paper, while the protective inscriptions deflected the dying Autarch's final psychic assault. The victory demonstrated that even the most advanced Xenos technology could not stand against a weapon blessed by the Emperor's own servants and wielded by one of his greatest champions. The battle against the Tyranid Hive Tyrant-designated specimen Omega-7 during the defense of Graia presented unique challenges that tested both Morkai's physical properties and its psychic protections. The massive bioconstruct, standing nearly twice Grimnar's height and armed with living weapons that could adapt to counter enemy attacks, represented one of the most dangerous opponents the Great Wolf had ever faced. The creature's psychic abilities allowed it to coordinate the actions of lesser Tyranids, while simultaneously launching mental attacks against its primary opponent. Morkai's protective runes provided crucial defense against these psychic assaults, their ancient power proving effective even against the alien consciousness of the hive mind. The physical confrontation required Grimnar to adapt his fighting style to counter an opponent whose weapons could literally evolve during combat to better penetrate his defenses. The Hive Tyrant's bone swords, initially designed for rapid strikes against lightly armored targets, began developing serrated edges and molecular acid coatings as the battle progressed. However, Morkai's blessed adamantium construction proved immune to these adaptations, its sanctified metal resisting both physical damage and biochemical corruption. The killing runes carved through the creature's carapace with devastating effect, each strike disrupting the bioelectric fields that coordinated its movements. The Tyranid's defeat came through a combination of Grimnar's tactical expertise and Morkai's supernatural properties, as the Great Wolf used the weapon's reach advantage to stay beyond the range of the creature's adaptive weapons, while delivering devastating strikes to critical nerve clusters. The final blow severed the Hive Tyrant's connection to the broader Tyranid swarm, its death causing a cascade failure that left hundreds of lesser creatures temporarily disoriented and vulnerable to Space Wolves' counterattacks. The victory demonstrated that even the most alien and adaptable enemies could not overcome the combination of human tactical genius and divinely blessed weaponry. Within Space Wolves' culture, Morkai represents far more than a simple weapon or even a symbol of rank. The axe embodies the chapter's connection to both their Primarch's legacy and the broader Imperial hierarchy, serving as a physical manifestation of the Great Wolf's authority over the 12 great companies and their thousands of warriors. The weapon's presence at chapter ceremonies, from the initiation of New Blood Claws to the elevation of Wolf Lords, reinforces the continuity of command that stretches back to Leman Russ himself. Young Space Marines who witness the Great Wolf wielding Morkai in combat carry those images with them throughout their careers, using them as inspiration during their own battles against the enemies of humanity. The axe's role in Space Wolves' tradition extends beyond its ceremonial functions to encompass its practical importance in maintaining chapter discipline and morale. When Grimnar appears on a battlefield carrying Morkai, every Space Wolf present understands that their supreme commander has committed himself personally to the engagement's success. This knowledge transforms even routine operations into battles of supreme importance, as warriors strive to prove themselves worthy of fighting alongside such a legendary weapon and its equally legendary wielder. The psychological impact of Morkai's presence often proves as decisive as its physical capabilities, inspiring Space Wolves to achievements that surpass their normal considerable abilities. The weapon's significance within the broader context of Space Marine culture reflects the unique position that the Space Wolves occupy within the Adeptus Astartes. While other chapters might view such ornate weaponry as excessive or impractical, the Sons of Russ understand that Morkai represents their connection to the savage nobility that defines their approach to warfare. The axe embodies the balance between civilized imperial values and the primal fury that makes the space wolves such effective warriors, serving as a reminder that true strength comes from embracing rather than suppressing one's fundamental nature. The maintenance and care of Morkai requires constant attention from the chapter's most skilled artificers and rune priests, who work together to preserve both its physical properties and its spiritual significance. The weapon undergoes regular blessing ceremonies designed to maintain the potency of its runic inscriptions, while master craftsmen inspect every component for signs of wear or damage that might compromise its effectiveness. These maintenance rituals serve additional purposes within chapter culture, providing opportunities for senior warriors to gather and discuss strategic matters while participating in the preservation of their most sacred relic. The Wolf Guard that serves as Logan Grimnar's personal retinue represents the absolute pinnacle of Space Wolves' martial prowess, drawn from veterans who have proven themselves across decades or even centuries of warfare. These elite warriors undergo a selection process that goes far beyond simple combat ability, requiring candidates to demonstrate not only exceptional skill with blade and bolter, but also the tactical acumen, unwavering loyalty, and strength of character necessary to serve at the highest levels of chapter command. The Great Wolf's personal guard typically numbers between 20 and 30 warriors at any given time, though this figure fluctuates based on casualties, promotions to Wolf Lord status, and the specific operational requirements of ongoing campaigns. The selection criteria for Grimnar's Wolf Guard extend beyond the traditional requirements that govern admission to the broader Wolfguard Brotherhood. Candidates must have served with distinction in multiple great companies, demonstrating their ability to adapt to different command styles and tactical doctrines, while maintaining their effectiveness across various combat environments. Many have previously held positions as pack leaders within the Grey Hunter or Long Fang formations, proving their capacity to lead other Space Marines in battle while executing complex tactical maneuvers under extreme pressure. The Great Wolf personally interviews each potential candidate, assessing not only their military record, but also their understanding of the broader strategic challenges facing the chapter and the Imperium. Among the most notable figures within Grimnar's inner circle stands Arjak Rockfist, the chapter's anvil of Fenris, and perhaps the most formidable warrior to serve in the Wolf Guard since the time of Leman Russ himself. Arjak's massive frame, even by Space Marine standards, houses strength that borders on the supernatural, allowing him to wield his Thunder Hammer foe hammer with devastating effect against the largest enemies. His tactical expertise extends beyond simple combat applications to encompass siege warfare, void combat, and the complex logistics of multi-company operations. Grimnar relies heavily on Arjak's counsel during strategic planning sessions, as the Anvil's experience spans conflicts against every major enemy of the Imperium across multiple sectors and war zones. The Wolfguard's organizational structure reflects the Space Wolves' preference for flexible command arrangements over rigid hierarchical systems. While Arjak holds the formal position of Anvil of Fenris, making him second in authority only to Grimnar himself, the other Wolfguard veterans operate as a council of equals whose expertise in different areas of warfare provides the Great Wolf with comprehensive tactical options. Veteran warriors specializing in void combat, urban warfare, wilderness operations, and anti-armor tactics each contribute their knowledge to mission planning processes that can adapt rapidly to changing battlefield conditions. The selection process for new Wolfguard members begins with nominations from Wolf Lords commanding the various great companies, who identify exceptional warriors within their formations who might possess the qualities necessary for service at the chapter level. These nominations undergo extensive review by existing Wolfguard members, who evaluate candidates based on combat records, leadership potential, and their demonstrated understanding of Space Wolves' traditions and values. The final selection requires unanimous approval from Grimnar's existing inner circle, ensuring that new members can integrate seamlessly into the established command structure while bringing fresh perspectives to tactical planning processes. Training regimens for newly selected Wolfguard members encompass far more than combat drills, though these remain intensive and comprehensive. The warriors must master advanced tactical systems, communication protocols, and the specialized equipment that enables them to coordinate operations across multiple great companies simultaneously. They study detailed analyses of previous campaigns, learning from both victories and defeats to develop the comprehensive understanding of warfare necessary for service at the highest command levels. The training process typically requires several months of intensive preparation before new Wolfguard members are considered ready for deployment alongside the Great Wolf. The specialized equipment employed by Grimnar's Wolfguard reflects their elite status and the dangerous nature of their typical assignments. Each warrior carries weapons and armor that represent the finest craftsmanship available to the Space Wolves chapter, often incorporating relics recovered from ancient battlefields or blessed by the chapter's most senior wolf priests. Terminator armor suits, modified with additional protective systems and enhanced targeting arrays, provide the heavy protection necessary for operations in the most hazardous combat environments. The suits built-in teleportation systems allow for rapid deployment directly into enemy strongholds or onto the bridges of hostile vessels, where conventional insertion methods would prove impossible. The Wolfguard's arsenal includes specialized weapons designed for specific tactical roles within Grimnar's command structure. Storm bolters modified with sanctified ammunition provide effective firepower against both conventional enemies and supernatural threats, while power weapons blessed with protective runes offer enhanced effectiveness against chaos-corrupted opponents. Several Wolfguard members carry ancient plasma weapons, whose machine spirits have been carefully maintained by the chapter's Iron Priests, providing devastating anti-armor capabilities that can penetrate even the heaviest enemy fortifications. The combination of traditional Space Wolves weaponry with advanced Imperial technology creates a versatile tactical package that can adapt to virtually any combat situation. The tactical doctrines employed by the Great Wolf's personal forces emphasize rapid deployment, overwhelming firepower, and the ability to achieve decisive results in critical situations where failure could compromise entire campaigns. These elite formations typically deploy via teleportation directly into the heart of enemy positions, using their superior equipment and training to establish beachheads that allow follow-up forces to exploit tactical advantages. The Wolfguard's ability to operate independently for extended periods makes them particularly valuable for deep strike missions behind enemy lines, where they can disrupt command structures and eliminate key targets before extraction or link-up with friendly forces. The integration of Grimnar's Wolfguard with the broader Space Wolves command structure requires careful coordination to ensure that their specialized capabilities complement rather than duplicate the functions of other chapter formations. The Wolfguard frequently serve as liaison officers with other Imperial forces, their enhanced training and equipment making them effective representatives of Space Wolves' interests in joint operations. Their presence on battlefields where multiple Imperial institutions operate together helps ensure that Space Wolves' tactical doctrine receives proper consideration in overall strategic planning, while maintaining the cooperative relationships necessary for successful coalition warfare. Beyond the immediate Wolfguard retinue, Grimnar's inner circle includes several Wolflords whose expertise and experience make them invaluable advisors on matters affecting the entire chapter. These senior commanders bring perspectives shaped by decades of leading their own great companies in campaigns across the galaxy, providing the Great Wolf with detailed knowledge of different enemy types, operational environments, and tactical challenges. The informal council that emerges from these relationships allows for comprehensive strategic planning that draws upon the collective experience of the Space Wolves' most successful field commanders. Wolflord Ragnar Blackmane represents one of the most dynamic voices within this advisory group, his relatively recent elevation to command bringing fresh perspectives to traditional Space Wolves' tactical approaches. Ragnar's experience leading rapid assault operations and his intuitive understanding of enemy psychology provide valuable insights during planning sessions for campaigns requiring aggressive, fast-moving tactics. His success in coordinating with other Imperial forces, particularly during joint operations with Imperial Guard regiments, offers useful models for future coalition warfare, scenarios that the chapter increasingly faces. The counsel of Wolf Lord Bjorn Stormwolf proves particularly valuable in matters involving void warfare and fleet operations, areas where his extensive experience commanding Space Wolves vessels provides crucial expertise. Bjorn's understanding of naval tactics, boarding operations, and the logistical challenges of maintaining chapter fleets across multiple star systems makes him an indispensable advisor when planning campaigns that require significant space-based assets. His relationships with Imperial Navy commanders and his knowledge of warp travel routes throughout the Segmentum Solar provide additional strategic advantages during complex multi-theater operations. Among the Iron Priests who serve in advisory roles, Ulrich Grimfang stands out for his expertise in both technological systems and the ancient traditions that govern Space Wolves' equipment maintenance and modification. His knowledge of the chapter's most sacred relics, combined with his understanding of advanced Imperial technology, makes him invaluable during operations that require specialized equipment or the deployment of ancient weapon systems. Ulrich's ability to coordinate with Adeptus Mechanicus representatives, while maintaining Space Wolves' independence in technical matters, provides crucial support for campaigns requiring significant technological resources. The rune priests within Grimnar's inner circle contribute perspectives that extend beyond conventional military planning to encompass the spiritual and supernatural aspects of warfare that play increasingly important roles in 41st millennium conflicts. These psychers provide early warning of chaos incursions, identify supernatural threats that might not be apparent through conventional intelligence gathering, and offer protective services during operations against enemies employing psychic warfare. Their ability to interpret omens and visions helps guide strategic decision-making processes, though Grimnar typically balances their mystical insights against practical military considerations. Enjal Stormcaller, the chapter's most powerful rune priest, serves as both advisor and active participant in the Great Wolf's most dangerous missions. His mastery of the psychic disciplines allows him to provide devastating support during combat operations, while his prophetic abilities help identify threats before they fully manifest. Enjal's experience combating chaos sorcerers, alien psychers, and demonic entities makes him particularly valuable during campaigns against supernatural enemies, where conventional weapons and tactics might prove insufficient. The coordination between these various advisors and the Wolf Guard creates a command structure that combines the Space Wolves' traditional emphasis on individual heroism with the sophisticated planning capabilities necessary for modern warfare. Regular council sessions bring together military, technical, and spiritual perspectives to create comprehensive strategic assessments that account for both conventional threats and the supernatural dangers that increasingly characterize Imperial conflicts. The informal nature of these discussions allows for frank exchanges of ideas while maintaining the respect for individual expertise that characterizes Space Wolves' command culture. The selection and training of replacement personnel for key positions within the inner circle represents an ongoing challenge that requires careful attention to ensure continuity of capabilities across generational transitions. Promising candidates from throughout the chapter undergo evaluation processes designed to identify those with the potential to eventually assume advisory roles, though the development of such expertise typically requires decades of specialized experience. The mentorship relationships that develop between current advisors and their potential successors help preserve institutional knowledge while allowing for the gradual evolution of tactical doctrines to meet changing threats. The integration of new technologies and weapon systems into the Great Wolf's tactical arsenal requires constant evaluation and testing to ensure that innovations enhance rather than compromise existing capabilities. The Iron Priests work closely with other members of the Inner Circle to assess new equipment, modify existing systems for specialized applications, and maintain the ancient relics that form the core of the chapter's most powerful weapons. This technological development process balances respect for traditional Space Wolves methods with the practical necessity of adapting to evolving enemy capabilities and changing battlefield conditions. The deployment patterns of Grimnar's elite forces reflect the strategic priorities that guide overall chapter operations, with the Great Wolf's personal involvement reserved for conflicts where his presence can achieve decisive results. These typically include campaigns against the most dangerous enemy commanders, operations requiring coordination between multiple Imperial institutions, and situations where the Space Wolves' reputation and political influence can provide advantages beyond simple military capabilities. The careful selection of engagements ensures that the chapter's most valuable assets are employed where they can achieve maximum strategic impact. The operational tempo demanded of Logan Grimnar as Great Wolf meant that his elite forces found themselves deployed across multiple theaters simultaneously, often facing the most dangerous enemies the Imperium had encountered in millennia. The diversity of threats requiring the personal attention of the Space Wolves' Supreme Commander reflected both the deteriorating strategic situation throughout Imperial space and Grimnar's reputation as one of the few leaders capable of achieving victory against seemingly impossible odds. Each campaign presented unique challenges that tested different aspects of his tactical expertise and the specialized capabilities of his inner circle. The confrontation with the Thousand Suns warband, known as the Crimson Covenant, began when astropathic communications from the hive world of Prospero's Folly ceased abruptly during what should have been routine supply requisitions. The planet's designation carried particular significance for the Space Wolves, as it had been named in commemoration of their Primarch's role in the destruction of the Thousand Suns' homeworld during the Horus Heresy. Imperial intelligence suggested that Chaos forces had somehow penetrated the world's defenses, but the complete communications blackout prevented detailed assessment of the threat level or enemy capabilities. Grimnar's initial deployment consisted of 3 great companies supported by specialized anti-psyker equipment drawn from the chapter's most sacred vaults. The Iron Priests had modified standard Astartes gear with additional protective systems designed to counter the sorcerous abilities that characterized Thousand Suns' combat doctrine. Psychic hoods enhanced with Fenrisian wolf totems provided improved resistance to mental attacks, while blessed ammunition incorporated fragments of sanctified metal that could disrupt the molecular bonds holding rubric marines together. The preparation process required several weeks of intensive ritual work by the chapter's wolf priests, who understood that facing the Thousand Suns demanded spiritual protection as much as physical preparation. The approach to Prospero's Folly revealed the extent of chaos corruption that had taken hold across the planet's surface. Massive geometric patterns carved into the landscape formed ritual circles visible from orbit, their precise mathematical arrangements suggesting the involvement of high-ranking Thousand Suns sorcerers with access to forbidden knowledge from the Great Library of Tizca. The planet's 3 hive cities showed signs of systematic modification, their spires twisted into configurations that hurt the eyes to observe directly and seemed to shift position when viewed through augur arrays. Atmospheric readings detected trace amounts of warp energy that made standard orbital bombardment inadvisable, as explosive impacts might trigger uncontrolled psychic phenomena. The initial ground assault targeted the smallest of the 3 hive cities, designated Tertius Prime, where Imperial resistance appeared to have lasted longest based on Vox traffic analysis conducted before the communications blackout. Grimnar led the assault personally, deploying via drop pod directly into the city's central plaza, where a massive ritual circle had been carved into the rockcrete surface. The geometric patterns etched into the ground pulsed with eldritch energy that made even the Space Wolves' enhanced vision struggle to maintain focus, while the air itself seemed to thicken with psychic pressure that pressed against their mental defenses. The Thousand Suns forces defending the plaza consisted primarily of rubric marines, whose dust-filled armor moved with mechanical precision despite the absence of living occupants. These animated suits of power armor retained muscle memory from their former inhabitants, allowing them to execute complex tactical maneuvers while maintaining the supernatural resilience that made them nearly immune to conventional weapons. Their bolters fired rounds inscribed with minor hexes that could penetrate standard power armor through sorcerous enhancement rather than simple kinetic force, requiring the Space Wolves to adapt their usual aggressive tactics to account for enemies whose ammunition possessed supernatural properties. The sorcerer leading the Thousand Suns contingent identified himself as Ozek Vorthak, a former captain whose transformation during the rubric of Ahriman had enhanced rather than destroyed his psychic abilities. His mastery of the discipline of change allowed him to manipulate reality at the molecular level, turning solid rockcrete into quicksand beneath the feet of charging space wolves, while simultaneously transmuting their ammunition into harmless dust before it could reach its targets. The protective runes inscribed on Grimnar's armor flared with brilliant light as they countered these reality warping effects, but the constant psychic pressure created a mental strain that threatened to exhaust even his superhuman endurance. The battle for Tertius Prime's central plaza lasted nearly 6 hours, with neither side able to achieve decisive advantage through conventional tactics. The Thousand Suns' sorceress abilities allowed them to reshape the battlefield continuously, creating obstacles and hazards that forced the Space Wolves to constantly adapt their approach while maintaining momentum in their assault. Grimnar's tactical expertise proved crucial in coordinating his forces' movements to avoid the worst effects of the enemy's reality manipulation, while concentrating firepower on targets whose destruction would disrupt the broader ritual patterns. The turning point came when Enjal Stormcaller arrived with reinforcements from the second wave, his psychic abilities providing the counter-sorcery necessary to neutralize Vorthak's reality warping techniques. The two psychers engaged in a battle of wills that manifested as visible distortions in the air around them, with lightning crackling between their outstretched hands, while the ground beneath their feet alternately froze solid and burst into flame. The psychic duel's intensity created feedback effects that disrupted the control mechanisms, binding the rubric Marines to their sorcerer's will, causing several squads to collapse into piles of empty armor and ancient dust. Vorthak's eventual defeat came through a combination of Enjal's psychic assault and Grimnar's physical intervention, as the Great Wolf used Morkai's blessed blade to disrupt the sorcerer's protective ward at the crucial moment when his attention was focused on countering the rune priest's mental attacks. The killing runes carved into the axe's surface blazed with psychic fire as they carved through the Thousand Suns champion's elaborate armor, while the weapon's sanctified construction proved immune to the desperate transmutation spells the sorcerer attempted to cast in his final moments. The liberation of Prospero's Folly's remaining hive cities required different tactical approaches, as the Thousand Suns forces adapted their defensive strategies to counter the Space Wolves' proven capabilities. The enemy sorcerers began employing more subtle forms of psychic warfare, creating illusions that made friendly forces appear as enemies, while simultaneously projecting false tactical information directly into the minds of Space Wolves' commanders. These mental attacks proved particularly dangerous because they could bypass the protective systems built into Astartes' armor and equipment, requiring constant vigilance from the chapter's rune priests to identify and counter. The campaign against Wascarjo presented entirely different challenges, as the massive Orc invasion force relied on overwhelming numbers and crude but effective technology rather than supernatural abilities. The Greenskin Horde had emerged from the galactic east, sweeping through several lightly defended Imperial systems before establishing a major staging area on the industrial world of Mordax Prime. Intelligence reports suggested that the Wan numbered in the millions, with supporting elements that included captured Imperial vehicles modified with typical Orc ingenuity, and several Gargants whose firepower rivaled that of Imperial Titans. Grimnar's strategic assessment recognized that conventional defensive tactics would prove inadequate against such overwhelming numbers, requiring instead a campaign of aggressive harassment designed to disrupt Orc logistics and command structures before they could achieve full coordination. The Space Wolves' preference for close combat aligned perfectly with this approach, as orc psychology respected physical prowess above all other qualities. By demonstrating superior fighting ability in direct confrontations, the Space Wolves could potentially trigger the kind of internal conflicts that often caused WoW forces to fragment into competing factions. The initial phase of operations focused on eliminating orc air support, as the Greenskins had assembled a substantial fleet of fighter bombers and transport aircraft that could provide rapid reinforcement to threatened positions. Space Wolves' Thunderhawk gunships, supported by fighter escorts from the Imperial Navy, engaged orc aircraft in a series of running battles across Mordax Prime's industrial landscape. The dogfights that resulted showcased the fundamental differences between Imperial precision and orc enthusiasm, with carefully coordinated Space Marine squadrons systematically eliminating enemy aircraft, whose pilots relied primarily on aggressive instincts rather than tactical coordination. The ground campaign began with a series of lightning raids against orc supply depots and fuel storage facilities, targeting the infrastructure that kept the massive invasion force operational. These strikes required careful timing to avoid orc patrols while maximizing damage to critical resources, with Space Wolves assault squads using jump packs to approach targets from unexpected angles before withdrawing rapidly to avoid retaliation. The success of these operations demonstrated the effectiveness of elite forces operating with superior intelligence and coordination against numerically superior but less disciplined opponents. Grimnar's personal involvement in the campaign came during the assault on the Orc Fortress factory designated Skarjaw's Stampa Yard, where the Greenskins were constructing super heavy walkers designed to spearhead their next offensive operation. The facility's defenses included multiple layers of crude but effective fortifications, with overlapping fields of fire from looted Imperial weapons and captured tanks modified with additional armor plating. The approaches were mined with explosive devices that ranged from sophisticated Imperial ordnance to simple grenade clusters that could still prove lethal to power armor. The assault plan called for simultaneous attacks on multiple sections of the fortress perimeter, forcing the orc defenders to divide their attention while preventing them from concentrating their superior numbers against any single breach point. Grimnar led the primary assault force against the facility's main gate, where the heaviest orc defenses were concentrated, but where success would provide the most direct route to the construction bays containing the partially completed gargants. His Wolf Guard provided close support, their Terminator armor allowing them to advance steadily through defensive fire that would have pinned down lighter forces. The battle for the main gate developed into exactly the kind of brutal close quarters fighting that both sides preferred, with Space Wolves' chainswords and power weapons clashing against orc choppas and power claws in a melee that covered several city blocks. The orcs' numerical advantage was partially offset by the Space Wolves' superior coordination and equipment, but the Greenskins' natural resilience and enthusiasm for combat made every yard of advance costly. Grimnar's presence on the battlefield provided crucial inspiration for his warriors, while his tactical expertise allowed them to maintain momentum despite fierce resistance. The fortress's eventual capture came after nearly 12 hours of continuous fighting, with the final orc positions falling only after their warboss was killed in single combat with Grimnar himself. The duel between the two commanders took place atop one of the partially constructed gargants, with both warriors using the massive walker's structure as additional weapons in their struggle. The orc warboss's power claw managed to score several hits on Grimnar's armor, but the blessed protection provided by his equipment prevented serious injury, while Morkai's sanctified blade carved through the Greenskins' crude but effective defenses. The psychological impact of the warboss's death created the cascade failure in orc morale that Grimnar had anticipated, as competing sub-leaders began fighting among themselves for control of the remaining forces rather than maintaining organized resistance against the Space Wolves' assault. This fragmentation allowed Imperial forces to achieve decisive victory with relatively modest casualties, demonstrating the effectiveness of targeting enemy command structures rather than attempting to destroy entire armies through attrition. The confrontation with Hive Fleet Jormungandrs, advanced elements near the Cadia system, presented challenges that tested every aspect of Space Wolves' tactical doctrine and equipment capabilities. The Tyranid bioships detected approaching the system's outer planets represented a scouting force whose primary mission involved gathering genetic samples and tactical intelligence for the main Hive fleet following behind. However, even these advanced elements numbered in the thousands and included some of the most dangerous bioforms the Great Devourer had yet evolved. Initial contact came when Tyranid spore pods began landing on the agricultural world of Cadia Secundus, disgorging swarms of hormigants and termagants that immediately began consuming local flora and fauna to fuel the creation of more sophisticated bioforms. The speed of this biological conversion process meant that delay would only strengthen the enemy, requiring immediate and decisive intervention before the Tyranids could establish the kind of fortified positions that had proven so costly to assault during previous encounters with Hive fleets. Grimnar's deployment strategy emphasized mobility and concentrated firepower, recognizing that the Tyranids' adaptive capabilities made prolonged engagements increasingly dangerous as the enemy evolved countermeasures to Imperial tactics. Space Wolves' forces would strike hard at identified Tyranid concentrations before withdrawing to new positions, denying the Hive Mind the opportunity to study their combat methods and develop appropriate responses. This approach required exceptional coordination between different elements of the assault force, as timing errors could result in units being isolated and overwhelmed by rapidly responding Tyranid swarms. The alien bioforms encountered during the Cadia Secundus operations included several previously unknown variants that demonstrated the Hive fleet's continued evolution in response to Imperial resistance. Warrior organisms equipped with enhanced sensory organs could detect space marines at ranges that made standard stealth approaches impossible, while new breeds of Carnifex had developed additional limbs that allowed them to engage multiple opponents simultaneously. The Tyranids' ability to adapt their forces in real time based on battlefield observations made every engagement a learning experience for both sides. The astropathic distress calls from the Sanctus Reach system arrived at the Fang during the depths of Fenris's winter cycle, their psychic resonance carrying undertones of desperation that immediately caught the attention of the chapter's rune priests. The messages spoke of a massive greenskin invasion, unlike anything the sector had witnessed in living memory, led by a warboss whose tactical acumen and sheer brutality had already claimed 3 Imperial worlds in rapid succession. The enemy commander identified himself as Gruck-Face Ripa, a name that carried ominous significance among Imperial intelligence networks as one of the most dangerous orc leaders to emerge from the galactic east in recent decades. Logan Grimnar's initial assessment of the threat recognized that this represented far more than a typical orc raiding force seeking easy plunder and good fights. The intelligence reports filtering through Imperial communication networks described a coordinated multi-world assault that demonstrated unusual strategic planning for greenskin forces. Gruxwa had struck simultaneously at key industrial centers, transportation hubs, and military installations across the Sanctus Reach system, suggesting a level of tactical sophistication that few orc leaders possessed. The systematic nature of these attacks indicated that the enemy commander understood the importance of disrupting Imperial logistics and command structures, rather than simply seeking the most dramatic battles. The strategic significance of the Sanctus Reach system extended far beyond its immediate military value, as the region served as a crucial link in the supply chains that supported Imperial operations throughout the segmentum. The loss of its industrial capacity would create cascading effects across dozens of nearby systems, potentially compromising ongoing campaigns against chaos incursions and other Xenos threats. The system's night houses, including the prestigious House Cadmus and House Griffith, represented irreplaceable military assets whose destruction would deprive the Imperium of some of its most powerful war machines. These considerations made immediate and decisive intervention not merely advisable, but absolutely essential to prevent strategic disaster. Grimnar's deployment orders reflected the scale and complexity of the threat facing Imperial forces in the Sanctus Reach. Rather than committing the entire Space Wolves chapter to a single massive assault, he divided his available forces across multiple operational theaters, recognizing that the Orc invasion's multi-pronged approach required an equally sophisticated Imperial response. The Great Wolf assigned specific great companies to individual worlds based on their commander's expertise and the particular challenges each theater presented. This distribution of forces maximized the Space Wolves' tactical flexibility while ensuring that each endangered world received appropriate support for its unique defensive requirements. Ragnar Blackmane's Great Company received orders to deploy to the Forge world of Alaric Prime, where Gruck's main force had established a massive staging area among the planet's industrial complexes. The young Wolf Lord's aggressive tactical style and proven ability to coordinate with other Imperial forces made him the optimal choice for operations requiring close cooperation with the Adeptus Mechanicus defenders and their Skitarii legions. His forces would need to operate within the complex urban environment of the Forge world's manufactorums, while avoiding damage to critical production facilities that the Imperium could not afford to lose. The deployment to the night world of Draconis III fell to Bjorn Stormwolf's Great Company, whose expertise in coordinating with Imperial armored formations made them natural partners for the planet's noble houses. The Knights of House Cadmus had already engaged advanced elements of the Orc invasion, but their relatively small numbers required support from forces capable of protecting their flanks and providing reconnaissance of enemy movements. Stormwolf's tactical acumen in combined arms operations would prove crucial in maximizing the effectiveness of the Knight Lances, while minimizing their exposure to concentrated Orc anti-armor weapons. The agricultural world of Asphodex, whose vast grain production supported Imperial Guard regiments across the sector, received support from Eric Morkai's Great Company. The planet's open terrain favored the kind of mobile warfare at which the Space Wolves excelled, but it also provided advantages to Orc speed freaks, whose ramshackle vehicles could achieve surprising effectiveness across flat landscapes. Morkai's experience in wilderness operations and his understanding of combined arms tactics made him well-suited to coordinate with the planet's planetary defense force while organizing the kind of fluid defensive operations necessary to protect widely scattered agricultural installations. Grimnar retained personal command of the remaining great companies, keeping them in reserve aboard the chapter's fleet assets while monitoring the developing situation across all theaters. This central position allowed him to respond rapidly to changing circumstances while maintaining overall strategic coordination between the dispersed Space Wolves forces. His command ship, the Fist of Russ, served as the nerve center for communications between different operational areas while providing heavy orbital fire support wherever the tactical situation required direct intervention from fleet assets. The coordination with other Imperial forces present in the Sanctus Reach system required careful diplomatic management to ensure effective cooperation without compromising Space Wolves' operational independence. The Astra Militarum regiments already engaged in defensive operations included veteran formations from multiple sectors, each with their own command structures and tactical doctrines. The 203rd Cadian Shock Troops brought expertise in urban warfare and defensive operations that complemented the Space Wolves' aggressive assault capabilities, while the Vestroyan Firstborn regiments provided exceptional marksmanship and discipline that proved valuable in coordinated fire support roles. The integration of Imperial Navy assets into the overall defensive strategy presented additional challenges, as the Void War component of the campaign required coordination between fleet elements from multiple sources. The Space Wolves' own vessels operated alongside Imperial Navy cruisers and destroyers whose commanders had varying levels of experience in joint operations with Astartes forces. The establishment of clear command protocols and communication procedures proved essential in preventing the kind of coordination failures that could prove catastrophic when facing an enemy as adaptable and aggressive as a major orc Wa. The Night Houses defending their ancestral worlds brought capabilities that no other Imperial forces could match, but their integration into broader tactical plans required understanding of their unique operational requirements and limitations. The towering war machines possessed firepower that could devastate entire orc formations, but their relatively small numbers made them vulnerable to concentrated enemy attacks or tactical isolation. The Space Wolves' role in supporting night operations often involved clearing enemy infantry from urban areas where the massive war machines could not operate effectively, while providing reconnaissance that allowed the knights to engage enemy armor at optimal ranges. The initial phases of the campaign demonstrated both the strengths and limitations of the Imperial response to Gruck's invasion. Space Wolves' forces achieved significant tactical successes in their assigned theaters, utilizing their superior training and equipment to inflict heavy casualties on orc formations, while suffering relatively modest losses in return. However, the sheer scale of the enemy invasion meant that these victories, while important for maintaining Imperial morale and preserving key installations, could not immediately halt the overall orc advance across the system. The fighting on Alaric Prime developed into the kind of brutal urban warfare that characterized many Imperial campaigns against orc invaders. The Forge world's industrial landscape provided both opportunities and challenges for defending forces, as the complex network of manufactorums and processing facilities offered excellent defensive positions while simultaneously creating multiple avenues of approach for attacking enemies. Ragnar's forces adapted quickly to the unique environment, using their knowledge of urban combat techniques to establish killing zones that maximize the effectiveness of their limited numbers against vastly superior enemy forces. The Adeptus Mechanicus defenders of Alaric Prime brought their own specialized capabilities to the campaign, including Skitarii formations equipped with advanced targeting systems and exotic weaponry that proved particularly effective against orc technology. The Tech Priest's understanding of the Forge world's industrial systems allowed them to modify production lines to create improvised defensive systems and specialized ammunition that enhanced the effectiveness of Imperial forces. However, their rigid adherence to established protocols sometimes conflicted with the Space Wolves' preference for flexible tactical responses to changing battlefield conditions. The coordination between Space Wolves and Mechanicus forces required ongoing negotiation and compromise, as both sides adapted their standard operating procedures to accommodate their allies' capabilities and limitations. Ragnar's diplomatic skills proved crucial in maintaining effective cooperation, while ensuring that tactical opportunities were not lost due to bureaucratic delays or doctrinal disagreements. The young Wolf Lord's reputation for reliability and his proven combat record helped establish the trust necessary for truly integrated operations between forces with very different organizational cultures. The battles across Draconis III showcased the devastating effectiveness of night war machines when properly supported by coordinated infantry and reconnaissance elements. Bjorn Stormwolf's Great Company provided the tactical intelligence and flank security that allowed the Knights of House Cadmus to engage enemy formations at optimal ranges, while avoiding the kind of close-quarters combat that could overwhelm even their massive war machines. The Space Wolves' mobility and superior communications equipment proved essential in coordinating complex multi-unit operations across the planet's varied terrain. The Orc forces attacking Draconis III included significant numbers of heavy vehicles and primitive titans that posed serious threats to the defending knights despite their technological inferiority. Gruck's forces had learned from previous encounters with Imperial war machines, developing crude but effective tactics for engaging targets that outclassed their own equipment in direct confrontation. These adaptations included the use of coordinated swarm attacks designed to overwhelm individual knights through sheer numbers, while specialized orc units attempted to disable the war machine's weapons systems or mobility. The agricultural world of Asphodex presented different challenges, as its open terrain favored mobile warfare, but provided limited opportunities for the kind of defensive positions that had proven effective on other worlds. Eric Morkai's tactical approach emphasized rapid movement and concentration of force at critical points, using the Space Wolves' superior mobility to achieve local superiority while avoiding prolonged engagements that would favor the numerically superior orc forces. His coordination with local planetary defense force units helped maximize the effectiveness of indigenous forces while providing them with the leadership and tactical expertise necessary for effective resistance. The climactic phase of the campaign began when intelligence reports indicated that Gruckface Ripa was concentrating his remaining forces for a decisive assault on Alaric Prime's primary forge complex. The Orc warboss had recognized that capturing the Forge world's most important industrial facility would provide both symbolic victory and practical advantages for his continued campaign across the system. The concentration of enemy forces around this single objective created opportunities for Imperial forces to achieve decisive results through coordinated counterattacks that could exploit the Orcs' temporary tactical vulnerability. Grimnar's strategic response involved the redeployment of Space Wolves' forces from secondary theaters to concentrate maximum combat power against Gruck's main force. This redistribution required careful timing to ensure that other Imperial worlds remained adequately defended while providing sufficient strength for the decisive engagement on Alaric Prime. The Great Wolf's personal involvement in the final assault demonstrated his recognition that this battle would determine the campaign's ultimate outcome and potentially influence the broader strategic situation throughout the sector. The final assault on Alaric Prime's forge complex required unprecedented coordination between multiple Imperial institutions, as Space Wolves' forces worked alongside Astra Militarum regiments, Knight houses, and Adeptus Mechanicus defenders in a complex operation designed to eliminate the Orc threat once and for all. The battle plan called for simultaneous attacks on multiple objectives, preventing Gruck's forces from concentrating their defenses while creating opportunities for Imperial forces to achieve breakthrough that would collapse the entire enemy position. The Crimson Fleet that emerged from the warp at the edge of the Fenris system carried with it the accumulated fury of 10,000 years of exile and defeat. Magnus the Red had returned to claim vengeance against the sons of Leman Russ, his massive form now twisted by millennia of service to Tzeentch into something that bore only passing resemblance to the noble Primarch who had once ruled Prospero. The Thousand Suns fleet that accompanied their demon Primarch represented the largest concentration of Chaos Astartes forces to threaten the Space Wolves' homeworld since the dark days of the Horus Heresy, their crimson and gold hulls bearing the scars of countless battles fought across the Eye of Terror. The initial psychic shockwave that preceded the fleet's arrival sent tremors through the warp that were felt by every rune priest on Fenris, their prophetic visions filled with images of burning ice and wolves consumed by eldritch fire. The chapter's psychers recognized immediately that this represented no ordinary chaos incursion, but a deliberate act of revenge orchestrated by one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. The psychic resonance carried with it the unmistakable signature of Magnus himself, his presence in real space creating distortions that made conventional astropathic communication impossible and threatened to drive lesser psychers to madness through proximity alone. Logan Grimnar's response to the approaching threat drew upon every lesson learned during his centuries of warfare against the enemies of mankind. The Great Wolf immediately ordered the recall of all Space Wolves' forces operating beyond the Fenris system, recognizing that this assault would require the chapter's full strength to repel successfully. However, the nature of the enemy meant that conventional defensive strategies would prove inadequate against foes who could manipulate reality itself through sorcerous means. The Thousand Suns possessed capabilities that went far beyond simple military might, their mastery of the psychic arts allowing them to bypass physical defenses and strike directly at the minds and souls of their enemies. The Fang's ancient defensive systems, built into the living rock of Asaheim during the Great Crusade and enhanced over the millennia with the finest Imperial technology, represented one of the most formidable fortress complexes in the galaxy. The massive structure's weapons batteries could engage enemy vessels at extreme range, while its void shields provided protection against orbital bombardment that could level entire continents. Deep within the fortress monastery's core, emergency protocols activated systems that had remained dormant for centuries, their machine spirits awakening to face a threat that matched the darkest prophecies preserved in the chapter's most sacred archives. The deployment of the chapter's forces across Fenris's surface required careful consideration of both conventional military factors and the supernatural threats that Magnus's presence would bring to bear. The Primarch's mastery of the discipline of change allowed him to manipulate matter at the molecular level, turning solid ground into quicksand or transforming breathable atmosphere into poisonous gas. His ability to project his consciousness across vast distances meant that no position could be considered truly safe from his influence, requiring constant vigilance from the chapter's rune priests to detect and counter his psychic intrusions. The Fenrisian tribal warriors who inhabited the planet's scattered settlements found themselves facing horrors beyond their comprehension as the first Thousand Suns landing craft descended through the planet's turbulent atmosphere. These hardy people, whose entire culture revolved around warfare and survival in one of the galaxy's most hostile environments, discovered that their traditional weapons and tactics proved utterly inadequate against enemies who could kill with a gesture or transform living flesh into crystal with a spoken word. The tribal shamans, whose primitive psychic abilities had always been viewed with suspicion by their communities, suddenly became invaluable as the only individuals capable of providing even minimal protection against sorcerous attacks. The integration of tribal forces into the broader defensive strategy required unprecedented coordination between the space wolves and the indigenous population they protected. Grimnar recognized that the tribe's intimate knowledge of Fenris's treacherous terrain could provide significant advantages in the coming campaign, but their lack of experience with supernatural enemies made them vulnerable to the kind of psychological warfare that the Thousand Suns employed as standard practice. The Great Wolf assigned veteran Wolfguard to serve as liaisons with the major tribal confederations, providing both tactical guidance and spiritual protection against the corrupting influence of chaos sorcery. The first major engagement occurred when a strike force of Thousand Suns rubric marines landed near the settlement of Ironhold, their dust-filled armor moving with mechanical precision as they advanced through the tribal warriors' defensive positions. The automated nature of these enemies proved particularly unnerving to the Fenrisians, whose warrior culture emphasized personal courage and individual prowess in combat. Their axes and spears, weapons that had served their ancestors for millennia, simply bounced off the ceramite plates that encased the animated dust of long-dead sorcerers. Only the intervention of a Space Wolves pack, led by Wolfguard battle leader Ranulf, prevented the complete massacre of Ironhold's defenders. The sorcerer commanding the Thousand Suns assault, a figure whose elaborate armor bore the twisted symbols of Tzeentch carved into its very structure, demonstrated the kind of reality-warping abilities that made conventional tactics useless against such enemies. His gestures caused the ground beneath charging tribal warriors to liquefy, swallowing entire groups of fighters while simultaneously creating barriers of crystallized air that deflected incoming fire from Space Wolves' bolters. The protective runes inscribed on Ranulf's armor flared with brilliant light as they countered these supernatural effects, but the constant psychic pressure created a mental strain that threatened to overwhelm even his enhanced physiology. The battle for Ironhold established patterns that would characterize the entire campaign, as the Thousand Suns demonstrated their preference for psychological warfare over direct military confrontation. Rather than simply destroying the tribal settlement and moving on to their next objective, the sorcerers spent hours tormenting the surviving defenders with illusions and minor reality alterations that slowly eroded their sanity. Warriors found their weapons transforming into serpents in their hands, while others watched in horror as their fallen comrades rose from the dead as shambling crystal constructs that retained their memories and personalities, but served the will of their chaos masters. The Fang itself became the primary target of Magnus's assault as the demon Primarch materialized in the fortress monastery's Great Hall through a combination of teleportation and reality manipulation that bypassed every defensive system the Space Wolves had constructed over 10 millennia. His towering form, wreathed in psychic fire and constantly shifting between different configurations, as the warp energies within him sought new expressions, filled the ancient chamber with a presence that made the very air difficult to breathe. The Primarch's single remaining eye blazed with the accumulated knowledge and fury of ages, its gaze capable of reducing mortal minds to gibbering madness while simultaneously analyzing every defensive measure the fortress contained. The Space Wolves warriors who responded to the intrusion found themselves facing an enemy whose capabilities transcended anything in their experience. Magnus's physical form possessed strength that rivaled their own Primarch, while his mastery of sorcery allowed him to attack on multiple levels simultaneously. His voice, when he chose to speak, carried psychic resonances that could shatter ceramite and drive listeners to madness, while his gestures summoned forth demons from the warp or transformed sections of the fortress into landscapes that defied physical laws. The ancient stone walls of the Fang, blessed by generations of wolf priests and inscribed with protective runes, provided some resistance to his reality-altering abilities, but could not completely neutralize the threat he represented. Grimnar's arrival in the Great Hall marked the beginning of a confrontation that would determine not only the fate of the Space Wolves chapter, but potentially the entire Fenris system. The Great Wolf's presence seemed to stabilize the warped reality around Magnus, his own connection to Fenrisian traditions, and the Emperor's will providing an anchor point that the demon Primarch's chaotic energies could not easily overcome. Morkai blazed with psychic fire as its protective runes activated in response to the overwhelming chaos presence, while the killing inscriptions along its edge pulsed with anticipation of striking at one of the Emperor's fallen sons. The duel between the two champions represented a clash between fundamentally different philosophies of warfare and existence. Magnus fought with the accumulated knowledge of 10,000 years spent in the Eye of Terror, his every move calculated according to probability matrices that took into account thousands of potential outcomes. His sorceress abilities allowed him to attack from multiple angles simultaneously, while his precognitive powers gave him advance warning of his opponent's intentions. The demon Primarch's form constantly shifted and changed as he drew upon different aspects of Tzeentch's power, sometimes appearing as a towering giant wreathed in flame and other times manifesting as multiple smaller forms that could attack from different directions. Grimnar's response relied upon the primal instincts and warrior traditions that had served the Space Wolves since their founding, his movements guided by intuition rather than calculation. The Great Wolf's connection to Fenris itself seemed to provide protection against Magnus's reality warping abilities, as if the planet's harsh environment had prepared him for challenges that transcended normal physical laws. His attacks with Morkai carried the weight of 10,000 years of Space Wolves tradition, each strike representing not merely personal combat prowess, but the collective will of every warrior who had ever served in defense of the Emperor's realm. The broader battle raging throughout the Fang saw Space Wolves defenders struggling against enemies whose capabilities challenged every aspect of their training and equipment. Thousand Sons sorcerers moved through the fortress monastery's corridors like living nightmares, their presence causing ancient stone to flow like water, while their spells transformed defending space marines into crystal statues or pools of bubbling flesh. The chapter's rune priests found themselves engaged in desperate psychic duels that took place as much in the immaterial realm of the warp as in physical reality, their minds stretched to breaking point as they attempted to counter sorceries that drew upon powers beyond mortal comprehension. The wolf priests who served as the chapter's spiritual guardians discovered that their traditional blessings and protective rites provided only limited defense against enemies who had spent millennia perfecting their mastery of supernatural forces. The sacred oils and blessed ammunition that had proven effective against conventional chaos forces seemed almost inadequate when facing sorcerers whose very presence could corrupt the molecular structure of blessed materials. These spiritual warriors found themselves forced to improvise new forms of protection, drawing upon the most ancient Fenrisian traditions, while simultaneously adapting imperial religious practices to counter threats that the ecclesiarchy had never anticipated. The tribal warriors fighting throughout Fenris's scattered settlements faced challenges that tested not only their physical courage, but their fundamental understanding of reality itself. Warriors who had faced ice trolls and frost giants without flinching found themselves paralyzed by terror when confronted with enemies who could kill with a word or transform living beings into inanimate objects through gestures alone. The shamans among the tribes, whose psychic abilities had always been viewed with suspicion, suddenly became the most valuable members of their communities as the only individuals capable of providing even minimal protection against sorcerous attacks. The planetary defense forces that supported the tribal warriors brought conventional military equipment to bear against enemies for whom such weapons held little meaning. Las cannons and missile launchers that could destroy tanks found their targeting systems disrupted by reality distortions that made accurate fire impossible, while their crews discovered that their training had not prepared them for enemies who could teleport behind their positions or phase through solid matter at will. The psychological impact of facing such supernatural foes proved as devastating as their actual casualties, as soldiers trained to fight conventional enemies struggled to maintain coherence when confronted with threats that violated every natural law they understood. The coordination between these diverse defensive forces required constant adaptation as the nature of the Thousand Suns assault became clear. Unlike conventional military campaigns, where objectives and tactics followed predictable patterns, the Chaos Forces seemed to operate according to plans that incorporated elements of prophecy, ritual requirement, and pure malice in equal measure. Their attacks often targeted locations of symbolic rather than strategic importance, while their timing seemed designed to maximize psychological impact rather than military advantage. This approach made conventional defensive planning extremely difficult, as traditional military logic provided little guidance for countering enemies whose motivations transcended normal strategic considerations. The first signs of the genetic instability that would plague the Space Wolves chapter emerged in the aftermath of the Sanctus Reach campaign, when several battle brothers from Ragnar Blackmane's Great Company began displaying behavioral changes that went far beyond the normal post-combat stress experienced by Astartes warriors. These Space Marines, all veterans with decades of faithful service, started exhibiting increased aggression levels that surpassed even the elevated baseline typical of their chapter. Their howls during battle took on distinctly Lupin qualities, while their fighting styles became increasingly feral and unpredictable. Most disturbing of all, some warriors began showing physical mutations that suggested their gene seed was reverting to more primitive configurations. The chapter's apothecaries initially attributed these symptoms to combat fatigue or exposure to exotic orc biotoxins encountered during the prolonged urban warfare on Alaric Prime. However, as similar cases began appearing among Space Marines from other great companies who had participated in different theaters of the campaign, it became clear that something more fundamental was affecting the chapter's genetic stability. The Wolf Priests conducted extensive examinations of the affected warriors, their gene scanners revealing anomalies in the Canis helix that had never been documented in the chapter's 10,000-year history. The situation escalated dramatically when astropathic communications from the warp storm surrounding the Eye of Terror brought news that would shake the very foundations of Space Wolves tradition. The 13th Great Company, lost during the pursuit of the Thousand Suns into the Eye of Terror following the burning of Prospero, had somehow survived their millennia-long exile in the realm of chaos. Even more shocking, they were returning to real space accompanied by warriors whose genetic degradation had progressed far beyond anything the chapter's medical personnel had previously encountered. These returning Space Marines, dubbed Wolfen by the terrified Imperial Guard units that first encountered them, retained their loyalty to the Emperor and their hatred of chaos despite physical transformations that had rendered them barely recognizable as Astartes. Their bodies had elongated and twisted, with extended limbs that ended in razor-sharp claws capable of rending ceramite armor. Their faces had stretched into lupin muzzles filled with fangs that could bite through steel, while their enhanced senses allowed them to track enemies across vast distances through scent alone. Most unsettling of all, these warriors fought with a primal fury that seemed to transcend even the legendary battle rage of their chapter, their howls carrying psychic resonances that could inspire terror in even the most hardened enemies. Logan Grimnar's first encounter with the returned Wolfen occurred when a strike cruiser, designated as belonging to the lost 13th Company, materialized at the edge of the Fenris system without warning. The vessel's hull bore the scars of 10,000 years in the warp, its ceramite plating twisted into configurations that hurt the eyes to observe directly, while its weapon arrays had been modified with materials that seemed to shift and flow like living tissue. The ship's machine spirit had clearly been affected by its prolonged exposure to chaos energies, yet it responded to Space Wolves' recognition codes and requested permission to approach Fenris with protocols that dated back to the Great Crusade. The warriors who emerged from the strike cruiser's landing bays represented a living testament to both the resilience of Space Wolves' gene seed and the horrific price of prolonged exposure to the warp's corrupting influence. Their power armor had fused with their mutated flesh in places, creating hybrid constructions of ceramite and living tissue that provided protection while allowing for the extreme physical changes their bodies had undergone. Some warriors retained enough of their original appearance to be recognizable as Space Marines, while others had transformed so completely that only their loyalty oaths and battle cries identified them as Sons of Russ. The leader of the returned warriors identified himself as Bolvi, a wolf guard who had served under the 13th Company's original commander during the pursuit into the Eye of Terror. His account of the millennia spent fighting chaos forces within their own realm provided insights into the nature of warp exposure that no Imperial scholar had previously possessed. According to Bolvi's testimony, the 13th Company had continued their mission throughout their exile, hunting Thousand Suns warbands across demon worlds where reality itself could be reshaped by thought and will. The constant exposure to chaos energies had triggered the genetic instabilities that transformed them into Wolfen, but their unwavering faith in the Emperor had protected their souls from the corruption that claimed so many others. The integration of the returned Wolfen into the chapter's command structure presented unprecedented challenges for Grimnar's leadership. These warriors possessed combat experience that spanned 10 millennia of warfare against humanity's greatest enemies, their tactical knowledge encompassing threats and environments that no other Imperial forces had survived to document. However, their physical transformations made it impossible for them to operate alongside conventional Space Marines without causing severe morale problems among both Astartes and mortal Imperial forces. The sight of warriors whose mutations resembled the very demons they fought created psychological pressures that could undermine unit cohesion even among veteran troops. The Great Wolf's decision to accept the Wolfen as legitimate members of the chapter, despite their mutations, represented a direct challenge to Imperial orthodoxy regarding genetic purity and the acceptable limits of Astartes enhancement. The Codex Astartes contained explicit provisions for the elimination of Space Marines whose gene seed had been compromised by chaos exposure, while the Inquisition maintained strict protocols for dealing with potentially corrupted Imperial personnel. Grimnar's position that the Wolfen's loyalty and effectiveness outweighed their physical abnormalities put him at odds with Imperial institutions that viewed genetic deviation as an inherent threat to the Emperor's realm. The chapter's rune priests conducted extensive examinations of the returned warriors, their psychic probes revealing that the Wolfen's minds remained fundamentally uncorrupted despite their physical transformations. The mutations appeared to represent an extreme expression of the Canis helix rather than chaos taint, suggesting that the Space Wolves' gene seed contained dormant capabilities that could manifest under sufficient stress. This discovery had profound implications for understanding the chapter's genetic heritage and the true nature of the modifications Leman Russ had undergone during his creation by the Emperor. The investigation into the Wolfen phenomenon revealed disturbing parallels, with the genetic instabilities beginning to appear among space marines who had never been exposed to warp energies. Battle brothers from across the chapter's great companies began displaying symptoms that suggested their gene seed was spontaneously manifesting the same mutations that had transformed the 13th Company during their exile. These cases typically began with increased aggression and enhanced sensory acuity before progressing to physical changes that could render affected warriors unfit for normal duty assignments. The pattern of mutations followed predictable stages that the chapter's medical personnel began documenting with growing concern. Initial symptoms included heightened territorial instincts and pack bonding behaviors that went beyond normal space wolves' social structures. Affected warriors became increasingly protective of their squad mates while displaying hostile reactions to members of other units or formations. Their enhanced senses allowed them to detect threats at greater distances, but also made them hypersensitive to stimuli that could trigger violent responses without warning. The second stage of the transformation involved physical changes that became impossible to conceal beneath standard power armor. Affected warriors experienced rapid bone growth that lengthened their limbs and altered their skeletal structure, while their musculature increased beyond even enhanced Astartes norms. Their fingernails hardened and extended into claws capable of rending metal, while their dental structure shifted to accommodate enlarged canine teeth. These physical modifications provided significant combat advantages, but made it impossible for transformed warriors to operate standard Astartes equipment without extensive modifications. The final stage of the Wolfen transformation resulted in warriors whose appearance bore only passing resemblance to their original human form. Their faces elongated into distinctly lupin configurations, while their bodies adopted a more bestial posture that emphasized speed and agility over the upright stance typical of space marines. Their vocalizations shifted from recognizable speech to howls and growls that could still convey tactical information to other pack members, but were incomprehensible to unaffected personnel. Despite these extreme changes, fully transformed Wolfen retained their tactical knowledge and equipment familiarity, making them devastatingly effective in close combat situations. The strategic implications of the Wolfen crisis extended far beyond the immediate challenges of integrating mutated warriors into existing command structures. The genetic instability affecting the Space Wolves' gene seed raised fundamental questions about the chapter's long-term viability and their ability to maintain recruitment levels necessary for continued operations. If the mutations continued spreading throughout the chapter's ranks, the Space Wolves might face the same kind of genetic collapse that had claimed other Astartes formations throughout Imperial history. The timing of the crisis could not have been worse, as the chapter faced increasing pressure from multiple external threats that required their full combat effectiveness. Chaos incursions along the Eye of Terror's periphery demanded constant vigilance from forces capable of operating in environments where conventional Imperial troops would quickly succumb to corruption. Orkwas emerging from the galactic east required the kind of aggressive response that only the Space Wolves could provide, while Tyranid hive fleets probing the galaxy's northern regions needed immediate containment before they could establish footholds in Imperial space. Grimnar's response to the genetic crisis demonstrated the pragmatic leadership style that had made him one of the Imperium's most effective military commanders. Rather than attempting to conceal the problem or eliminate affected warriors, he chose to embrace the Wolfen as a new type of specialized unit whose unique capabilities could provide tactical advantages in specific combat situations. This decision required careful management to prevent panic among the chapter's unaffected personnel, while maintaining operational security to avoid unwanted attention from Imperial institutions that might view the mutations as evidence of chaos corruption. The deployment of Wolfen units in combat operations required the development of entirely new tactical doctrines that could maximize their unique capabilities while minimizing the risks associated with their unpredictable behavior. These transformed warriors excelled in close combat situations, where their enhanced physical abilities and primal fighting instincts provided overwhelming advantages against conventional enemies. However, their tendency toward pack behavior and their difficulty operating complex equipment made them unsuitable for missions requiring precise coordination or the use of advanced technology. The psychological impact of the Wolfen crisis on the chapter's unaffected personnel created additional challenges that required careful attention from the Wolf priests and senior commanders. Many Space Marines struggled with the fear that they might eventually succumb to the same genetic instability, while others questioned whether the mutations represented divine punishment for some unknown transgression against the Emperor's will. The chapter's spiritual leaders worked to maintain morale by emphasizing the Wolfen's continued loyalty and effectiveness, while providing counseling for warriors displaying early symptoms of genetic instability. The broader Imperial reaction to news of the Space Wolves' genetic problems varied considerably depending on the institution involved and their relationship with the chapter. The Adeptus Mechanicus expressed scientific interest in studying the mutations to better understand the mechanisms underlying Astartes' genetic enhancement, while the Ecclesiarchy viewed the transformations as potential evidence of divine intervention in the chapter's affairs. The Inquisition's response proved more problematic, as several Ordo Hereticus investigators began questioning whether the mutations represented chaos corruption that had somehow evaded detection by conventional screening methods. The diplomatic challenges created by the Wolfen crisis required Grimnar to utilize all of his political skills to maintain the chapter's operational independence while addressing legitimate concerns about genetic stability and potential corruption. His reputation for reliability and his proven track record of service to the Imperium provided significant protection against more extreme responses, but the unprecedented nature of the genetic mutations made it impossible to completely dismiss institutional concerns about the chapter's continued trustworthiness. The investigation into the root causes of the genetic instability revealed connections between the Canis helix and ancient Fenrisian genetic markers that predated human settlement on the planet. The Space Wolves' gene seed appeared to incorporate elements drawn from the world's native ecosystem, creating hybrid genetic structures that could manifest in unexpected ways under sufficient stress. This discovery suggested that the Wolfen transformations represented a reversion to more primitive configurations rather than corruption by external influences, though the distinction provided little comfort to warriors facing the prospect of losing their humanity. The search for potential treatments or preventive measures led the chapter's medical personnel to consult archives that had remained sealed since the time of Leman Russ himself. These ancient records contained references to genetic modification techniques that the Primarch had employed during the chapter's founding, suggesting that he had anticipated the possibility of such mutations and prepared contingency measures that his successors had never needed to implement. The complexity of these procedures required expertise that few individuals in the current Imperium possessed, making any attempt at genetic stabilization extremely risky. The return of Robute Guilliman to the realm of the living sent shockwaves throughout the Imperium that reached even the isolated halls of the Fang on distant Fenris. When astropathic messages arrived bearing the impossible news that one of the Emperor's sons had awakened from his millennia-long stasis, Logan Grimnar's initial reaction combined profound skepticism with the instinctive wariness that had served him well throughout centuries of warfare against enemies who specialized in deception and manipulation. The Great Wolf had witnessed too many false prophets, and demons spawned impostors claiming divine authority to accept such extraordinary claims without substantial evidence. The detailed reports that followed painted a picture of unprecedented change sweeping across the Imperium's highest echelons of command. Guilliman had not merely returned from the edge of death, but had assumed the mantle of Lord Commander of the Imperium, wielding authority that had remained vacant since the Emperor's internment upon the Golden Throne 10,000 years earlier. Even more remarkable were the accounts of new Space Marine variants called Primaris Marines, warriors whose enhanced physiology supposedly surpassed even the considerable capabilities of traditional Astartes. These claims struck at the very foundations of everything the Space Wolves understood about their own nature and purpose within the Emperor's grand design. Grimnar's skepticism deepened when he learned that these Primaris Marines had been created through the work of Archmagos Dominus Belisarius Call, a figure whose reputation for radical experimentation and willingness to push the boundaries of orthodox imperial doctrine made him a controversial choice for such a momentous undertaking. The idea that any individual, regardless of their technical expertise, could improve upon the Emperor's original work in creating the Astartes seemed to border on blasphemy. The Space Wolves had always viewed their gene seed as a sacred trust passed down directly from Leman Russ, and the suggestion that it could be enhanced or modified by mortal hands challenged fundamental beliefs about their identity as the Emperor's chosen warriors. The timing of Guilliman's return, coinciding as it did with the opening of the Great Rift and the galaxy-wide catastrophes that followed, raised additional questions about the Primarch's true nature and motivations. The Space Wolves had learned through bitter experience that periods of crisis often provided opportunities for chaos forces to infiltrate imperial institutions through subterfuge and corruption. The possibility that the returned Primarch might represent some form of elaborate deception orchestrated by the ruinous powers could not be dismissed without thorough investigation and verification through means that went beyond simple astropathic communication. The Great Wolf's concerns extended beyond questions of authenticity to encompass the broader implications of Guilliman's return for the balance of power within imperial command structures. The Space Wolves had maintained their independence from external authority through careful cultivation of their reputation for reliability and effectiveness, combined with the political protection provided by their status as one of the original first founding chapters. The emergence of a Primarch wielding unprecedented authority threatened to upset these delicate arrangements and potentially compromise the chapter's ability to operate according to their own traditions and tactical doctrines. When the first Primaris reinforcements arrived at Fenris aboard ships bearing the Ultramarines' heraldry, Grimnar's initial inspection of these new warriors revealed capabilities that were undeniably impressive from a purely military perspective. The Primaris Marines stood taller than their traditional counterparts, their enhanced physiology providing increased strength, speed, and resilience that would prove valuable in the kinds of brutal combat situations the Space Wolves regularly faced. Their equipment incorporated technological innovations that represented significant advances over standard Astartes gear, with bolt rifles whose range and accuracy exceeded anything previously available to Imperial forces. However, the Great Wolf's experienced eye also detected subtle differences in bearing and temperament that distinguished these new warriors from the battle-hardened veterans he had commanded throughout his career. The Primaris Marines displayed a level of tactical discipline and adherence to doctrine that seemed almost mechanical in its precision, lacking the intuitive adaptability and creative thinking that characterized the most effective Space Wolves warriors. Their responses to unexpected situations followed predictable patterns based on their training rather than the kind of instinctive reactions that came from years of combat experience against diverse enemies. The integration challenges became apparent during the first joint training exercises conducted between traditional Space Wolves and their Primaris reinforcements. The new warriors' enhanced physical capabilities allowed them to outperform their older counterparts in many individual tasks, but their unfamiliarity with Space Wolves, combat doctrines, and cultural traditions created coordination problems that undermined overall unit effectiveness. The Primaris Marines had been trained according to standardized protocols derived from the Codex Astartes, while the Space Wolves had developed their own tactical approaches based on Fenrisian warrior traditions and 10,000 years of practical experience. The cultural barriers proved even more challenging than the tactical differences, as the Primaris Marines struggled to understand the informal command structures and pact-based social dynamics that governed Space Wolves' operations. These new warriors had been created and trained in sterile laboratory environments that bore no resemblance to the harsh realities of Fenrisian tribal society, leaving them unprepared for the kind of rough camaraderie and competitive spirit that bound traditional Space Wolves together. Their attempts to integrate into existing pack structures often resulted in misunderstandings and conflicts that required intervention from senior commanders to resolve. The Primaris Marines' unfamiliarity with Space Wolves' traditions extended beyond simple cultural differences to encompass fundamental aspects of chapter identity and purpose. These warriors had received extensive indoctrination in Imperial history and doctrine, but lacked the deep connection to Fenrisian mythology and Leman Russ's teachings that shaped every aspect of traditional Space Wolves thinking. Their understanding of concepts like honor, loyalty, and brotherhood remained abstract and theoretical, rather than the visceral, emotional bonds that drove their older battle brothers to extraordinary acts of courage and sacrifice. The language barriers created additional complications, as many Primaris Marines had been trained to communicate primarily in High Gothic and struggled with the mixture of Fenrisian dialects and battle cant that characterized normal Space Wolves' discourse. The subtle nuances of meaning conveyed through tone, inflection, and cultural reference were lost on warriors whose linguistic education had focused on precise technical terminology rather than the rich oral traditions that preserved 10,000 years of chapter history. These communication problems made it difficult for mixed units to achieve the kind of seamless coordination that characterized elite Space Wolves formations. Despite these challenges, Grimnar recognized that the Primaris reinforcements represented a valuable resource that could help address the chapter's ongoing personnel shortages and genetic instabilities. The new warriors' enhanced physiology appeared to be immune to the Canis helix mutations that had been affecting increasing numbers of traditional Space Marines, potentially providing a stable foundation for future recruitment and expansion. Their advanced equipment and training could also provide tactical advantages in specific combat situations, where their capabilities complemented rather than conflicted with established Space Wolves methods. The Great Wolf's approach to integration emphasized gradual assimilation rather than immediate wholesale adoption of Primaris forces. He assigned small numbers of the new warriors to veteran packs, where they could learn Space Wolves' traditions through direct observation and participation rather than formal instruction. This mentorship approach allowed experienced battle brothers to identify and correct problematic behaviors while providing the Primaris Marines with practical examples of how theoretical tactical principles applied in real combat situations. The selection of appropriate mentors for Primaris integration required careful consideration of personality compatibility and tactical expertise. Grimnar chose veteran sergeants and pack leaders whose combination of combat experience and teaching ability made them effective guides for warriors who possessed superior physical capabilities but lacked practical knowledge of Space Wolves' methods. These mentors faced the challenging task of breaking down ingrained habits and thought patterns while building new ones based on entirely different philosophical foundations. The weapons training programs developed for Primaris Marines reflected the need to bridge the gap between their standardized education and the specialized requirements of Space Wolves operations. While their basic marksmanship and close combat skills were excellent by Imperial standards, they lacked familiarity with the improvised tactics and unconventional weapon applications that characterized Fenrisian warfare. Training exercises focused on developing the kind of creative problem-solving abilities that allowed traditional Space Wolves to achieve victory in situations where conventional approaches would fail. The gradual acceptance of Primaris reinforcements within the chapter's rank and file required ongoing efforts to address the concerns and prejudices of traditional Space Marines who viewed the newcomers with suspicion. Many veterans questioned whether warriors who had never experienced the trials of Fenrisian selection and training could truly understand what it meant to be a son of Russ. The Great Wolf's personal endorsement of the integration program provided crucial leadership support, but changing deeply held cultural attitudes required time and demonstrated competence from the Primaris Marines themselves. The first combat deployment of mixed space wolves and Primaris units occurred during a relatively minor engagement against Orc raiders in the outer reaches of the Fenris system. The operation's limited scope and familiar enemy type provided an ideal testing ground for evaluating how well the two types of warriors could function together under actual combat conditions. The results proved encouraging, as the Primaris Marines' enhanced firepower and resilience complemented the tactical flexibility and aggressive spirit of their traditional counterparts. The success of these initial joint operations helped establish precedents for future integration efforts, while identifying specific areas where additional training and coordination were needed. The Primaris Marines' tendency to maintain formation discipline even in fluid combat situations sometimes conflicted with the Space Wolves' preference for opportunistic individual actions, but their superior equipment and physical capabilities provided significant advantages when properly employed. The key to successful integration lay in developing tactical doctrines that utilized each type of warrior's strengths while minimizing the impact of their respective limitations. When Guilliman's call for participation in the Indomitus Crusade reached Fenris, Grimnar faced a decision that would have far-reaching implications for his chapter's future relationship with the broader Imperium. The Primarch's galaxy-spanning campaign to reclaim worlds lost during the opening of the Great Rift represented exactly the kind of large-scale military operation that could benefit from Space Wolves' expertise and experience. However, committing significant chapter resources to operations under Guilliman's direct command would require accepting a level of external authority that the Space Wolves had successfully avoided throughout their history. The strategic situation created by the Great Rift's opening had fundamentally altered the balance of threats facing Imperial space, with Chaos incursions and Xenos invasions occurring on a scale that exceeded anything seen since the Horus Heresy. The traditional approach of individual chapters operating independently against localized threats was proving inadequate to address galaxy-wide catastrophes that required coordinated responses from multiple Imperial institutions. Grimnar's analysis of intelligence reports suggested that participation in the Indomitus Crusade might represent the most effective way to protect Fenris and the surrounding systems from the chaos engulfing the galaxy. The Great Wolf's decision to commit 3 full great companies to the Indomitus Crusade reflected his recognition that the current crisis demanded unprecedented cooperation between Imperial forces. The selection of units for deployment emphasized the integration of Primaris and traditional Space Marines, providing opportunities to test their combined effectiveness against the full spectrum of enemies likely to be encountered during the Crusade. The mixed composition of these forces also demonstrated the chapter's commitment to adapting their methods while maintaining their essential character and traditions. The deployment preparations required extensive coordination with other Imperial institutions participating in the Crusade, including Adeptus Mechanicus Forge Worlds, Imperial Guard regiments, and other Space Marine chapters. The Space Wolves' reputation for independence and occasional friction with Imperial authorities made some potential allies wary of close cooperation, requiring diplomatic efforts to establish the trust necessary for effective joint operations. Grimnar's personal involvement in these negotiations helped reassure other commanders that the Space Wolves could function effectively within larger command structures when circumstances required such cooperation. The logistical challenges of supporting Space Wolves, forces operating far from Fenris, required careful planning and resource allocation to ensure sustained combat effectiveness throughout what promised to be an extended campaign. The chapter's fleet assets would need to coordinate with Imperial Navy vessels and Mechanicus supply ships, whose operational procedures differed significantly from traditional Space Wolves methods. The integration of Primaris Marines added additional complexity, as their specialized equipment and ammunition requirements could not be met through standard Space Wolves supply chains. The opening of the Great Rift fundamentally altered the strategic landscape, that Logan Grimnar had navigated throughout his centuries of service as Great Wolf. The massive warp storm that split the galaxy in half created unprecedented challenges that tested every aspect of his leadership abilities and forced adaptations to tactical doctrines that had served the Space Wolves effectively for 10 millennia. The psychic maelstrom's effects reached far beyond simple navigation hazards, disrupting astropathic communications across vast regions of Imperial space, while simultaneously strengthening the influence of chaos forces throughout the galaxy. The immediate aftermath of the rift's opening saw chaos incursions erupting across systems that had remained stable for centuries, their sudden appearance overwhelming local defense forces unprepared for the scale and intensity of demonic manifestations. Imperial worlds that had never faced supernatural threats found themselves battling entities whose very presence corrupted reality itself, while established fortress worlds discovered that their traditional defensive strategies proved inadequate against enemies who could bypass physical barriers through dimensional manipulation. The Space Wolves, with their extensive experience combating chaos forces and their natural resistance to corruption, found themselves in unprecedented demand for operations requiring immediate and decisive intervention. Grimnar's strategic response to the crisis demonstrated the comprehensive understanding of galactic warfare that had made him one of the Imperium's most respected military commanders. Rather than attempting to respond to every distress call simultaneously, he prioritized deployments based on strategic importance and the likelihood of achieving meaningful results with available resources. This approach required difficult decisions about which Imperial worlds would receive direct Space Wolves support and which would need to rely on other forms of assistance or face their fate alone. The Great Wolf's reputation for making such choices based on military necessity rather than political considerations earned him both respect and criticism from different Imperial institutions. The integration of Primaris Marines into Space Wolves operations accelerated dramatically as the scope of the crisis became apparent. The enhanced warriors' superior physical capabilities and advanced equipment proved particularly valuable in the kinds of high-intensity combat situations that characterized most chaos incursions. Their resistance to corruption and their ability to maintain effectiveness in environments saturated with warp energy made them ideal candidates for missions that would quickly exhaust traditional Space Marines. However, their continued unfamiliarity with Space Wolves' traditions and tactical doctrines created ongoing challenges that required constant attention from veteran commanders. The cultural assimilation process for Primaris reinforcements evolved significantly as both traditional and enhanced Space Marines gained experience working together in actual combat situations. The artificial barriers created by different training backgrounds and cultural expectations gradually broke down as warriors on both sides recognized the practical benefits of cooperation. Primaris Marines began adopting elements of Fenrisian warrior culture, while traditional Space Wolves learned to incorporate the tactical advantages provided by their enhanced brothers' superior equipment and capabilities. The Great Wolf's influence on this integration process extended beyond simple administrative decisions to encompass his personal example of treating all Space Marines as equally valuable members of the chapter regardless of their origins or enhancement level. His willingness to deploy mixed units in critical operations demonstrated his confidence in their combined effectiveness while sending clear signals about acceptable attitudes toward the new warriors. This leadership approach proved crucial in preventing the kind of factional divisions that had plagued other chapters attempting to integrate Primaris reinforcements. The recruitment practices of the Space Wolves underwent subtle but significant modifications as the chapter adapted to the realities of the 42nd millennium. The traditional trials conducted among Fenrisian tribal populations continued to provide the majority of new aspirants, but the increased operational tempo demanded supplementation from additional sources. The chapter began accepting candidates from other worlds within the Fenris system, carefully screening them for the psychological and physical characteristics that had traditionally been associated with successful Space Wolves recruits. This expansion of the recruitment base helped maintain personnel levels while preserving the essential cultural elements that define chapter identity. The Great Wolf's relationship with other Imperial institutions evolved considerably as the galaxy-wide crisis forced unprecedented levels of cooperation between organizations that had traditionally maintained strict independence. His participation in joint operations with other Space Marine chapters, Imperial Guard regiments, and even Adeptus Mechanicus forces required diplomatic skills that complemented his proven military abilities. The reputation for reliability and effectiveness that he had built over centuries of service provided crucial credibility in negotiations with commanders who might otherwise be reluctant to coordinate closely with the notoriously independent Space Wolves. The chapter's doctrine development during this period reflected Grimnar's pragmatic approach to adapting traditional methods for new challenges. The fundamental principles that had guided Space Wolves' operations since their founding remained unchanged, but their application evolved to incorporate lessons learned from fighting enemies whose capabilities exceeded anything previously encountered. The integration of new technologies, enhanced personnel, and expanded tactical options created opportunities for innovation, while maintaining the aggressive, flexible approach that characterized the chapter's most successful operations. The preservation of Fenrisian culture and traditions became an increasingly important aspect of Grimnar's leadership, as the chapter faced pressures to standardize their methods according to broader Imperial requirements. His commitment to maintaining the unique characteristics that made the Space Wolves effective required constant vigilance against homogenizing influences that could undermine their distinctive capabilities. The Great Wolf's approach emphasized adaptation rather than abandonment of traditional practices, finding ways to incorporate new elements while preserving the essential cultural foundations that had produced 10,000 years of successful warriors. The mentorship role that Grimnar played in developing younger Wolf Lords proved crucial as the chapter's operational commitments expanded beyond anything previously experienced. His guidance helped these rising commanders understand the complex balance between maintaining Space Wolves' independence and cooperating effectively with other Imperial forces. The lessons he provided drew upon centuries of experience navigating political challenges while achieving military objectives, preparing his successors for the kinds of leadership responsibilities they would face in an increasingly complex strategic environment. The Great Wolf's personal combat effectiveness remained undiminished despite his advanced age by Space Marine standards, with Morkai continuing to serve as one of the Imperium's most formidable weapons against the enemies of mankind. His presence on battlefields throughout the galaxy provided inspiration for both Space Wolves and allied forces, while demonstrating that the chapter's leadership remained actively engaged in the most dangerous operations. The psychological impact of his participation in critical engagements often proved as valuable as his tactical contributions, as enemies and allies alike recognized the significance of the Great Wolf's personal involvement. The strategic challenges facing the Space Wolves in the 42nd millennium extended far beyond simple military considerations to encompass questions about the chapter's long-term survival and evolution. The genetic instabilities that had manifested as the Wolfen Crisis continued to affect portions of the chapter's personnel, while the integration of Primaris Marines created new possibilities for genetic stabilization. Grimnar's approach to these challenges emphasized practical solutions over theoretical purity, accepting whatever methods proved effective in maintaining the chapter's combat effectiveness while preserving their essential character. The Great Wolf's vision for the chapter's future reflected his understanding that adaptation and evolution were necessary for survival in a galaxy where the threats facing humanity continued to grow in scope and intensity. His leadership during the transition to the 42nd millennium established precedents that would guide the Space Wolves through whatever challenges lay ahead, while his personal example demonstrated the kind of courage and determination that would be required to preserve the Emperor's realm against increasingly desperate odds. The legacy that Logan Grimnar built during his unprecedented tenure as Great Wolf encompassed far more than simple military victories or tactical innovations. His influence on Space Wolves' culture, imperial politics, and the broader understanding of what it meant to serve the Emperor in an age of endless war created foundations that would endure long after his eventual passing. The traditions he preserved, the alliances he forged, and the principles he upheld established patterns that would shape the chapter's development for generations to come. As the 42nd millennium progressed and new threats emerged from the darkness between the stars, the Space Wolves under Grimnar's leadership stood ready to face whatever challenges awaited them. Their combination of ancient traditions and adaptive innovation, guided by a leader whose wisdom had been forged in centuries of warfare, represented one of humanity's most reliable bulwarks against the forces that sought to destroy the Emperor's realm. The Great Wolf's continued presence at the head of his chapter provided stability and inspiration in an age when both commodities had become increasingly precious, ensuring that the Sons of Russ would continue to serve as the Emperor's executioners in the grim darkness of the far future. The question of succession, while not yet urgent given Grimnar's continued vitality and effectiveness, remained an important consideration for the chapter's long-term planning. The Great Wolf's efforts to develop capable subordinate commanders and preserve institutional knowledge would prove crucial when the time came for new leadership to emerge. His legacy would live on not only in the victories achieved during his tenure, but in the foundations he established for future generations of Space Wolves to build upon as they face the eternal struggle to defend humanity against the darkness that threatened to consume the galaxy.